are these people?
I did want to talk about this. And as I said earlier, we've talked a little bit about this before. I know Richie Medhurst, shout out to him, has talked about this probably a little more extensively than we have. But as I said earlier, I think this is a story that everyone should be talking about more, given the implications moving forward, considering what's happening in the Middle East right now, could very well be catastrophic in terms of how this relates to Israel, but other countries in the region and ultimately us in the West if we're not careful. So, um, I basically said to Reef, I'm talking about this story in a way as kind of insurance because I'm sure that this will be mentioned at some point, probably not now, but within the next 3 years. So this could be something that, number one, we want to have on record to kind of say we've talked about this before. But number two, especially given you guys are here for a reason, we want to make sure that you guys are aware of the implications of this so that you can understand fully of what's happening in Israel right now, that you guys know it's not strictly just about the Palestinians, really. Like, there are economic issues involved in this that mainstream media is not talking about and will not talk about, that Israel is going through the motions right now to basically commit genocide against the Palestinians. But it goes a lot more deeper besides, eradication of Palestinians. If anything, and I said this, I believe, last week, Palestinians are in the way of the plans that Israel has had in mind for decades. What do I mean by that? So let's play this TikTok. If you can read the name on this, Reef.
Yes, Kim Runner. At Kim Runner.
There we go. So she talks about.
Well, that's not the that's the person on Twitter who posted it. I will try to zoom in when we do the thing, and I'll try to read it.
So yeah, let's listen to what she has to say, and we'll continue after she's done.
We've all been getting played. My mind is blown. I just watched something that answers every question about why America, the UK, and France are so staunchly in support of Israel and what it's doing right now. And of course, it has to do with money, obviously. But not what we would have thought of. I think we all would have assumed it was oil. Turns out it's not. Turns out this is what it's all about. This is the Suez Canal. This is owned by Egypt. The Suez Canal makes about $9 billion a year. And where does that $9 billion go to? It goes to Egypt. Egypt nationalized the canal, so it makes all the profit. So who's not collecting on this are the Americans, the British, and the French, and the Israelis. They want to change that. Enter the Ben Gurion Canal project over here. This is what's happening right now in the Middle East. What we're seeing on TV is all a ploy. It's all about granting access for this canal. The American and Israeli government plan on nuking this land over here to build a canal. They're going to use this land because that land is built out of a rocky terrain, whereas the Suez Canal is built on more of a sandy terrain. By digging through a rockier ground, they would have more likelihood to have a wider canal allowing two ships to pass each other at the same time, as opposed to one ship, which is presently happening in the Suez Canal. And where do you think that canal empties? Not just in the Mediterranean Sea. The Ben Gurion Canal would empty right in northern Gaza. The Ben Gurion Canal would empty into the Mediterranean at the northern point of Gaza. Northern Gaza. So all we're seeing here, ethnic cleansing, genocide, forcing all of the Palestinians into the south of Gaza. It's all to build this canal.
And that's even not, like, that picture right there is not even the secondary picture I normally see of it going directly through Gaza. That was above Gaza. But like the one I see is like directly through, like that little bend. There's a couple little squigglies that they take out and go straight, and it's through Gaza.
Well, right, but either way,
yes,
this explains.
Yeah,
especially in northern Gaza, why they're pushing them to the south.
Right,
because assuming that Israel gets the green light to do this, then they're able to make the proposal, or at least they have made the proposal several times,
right,
in order to complete this project. So let's talk about it a little bit more in depth.
Robert Inlakesh, one of my favorites.
Yes,
I have him there tonight too.
He reported. Wait. Yeah. Here we go. Wait. Actually, there we go. So he reports Gurion Canal. U.S. supports Israel-Gaza war over a trade route. Okay. So,
and one more clicky to go back. Cool.
There we go. The U.S. and Israel have been planning the construction of brand new trade routes, which are only possible through normalization agreements signed between Tel Aviv and the Arab world. So what is the Ben Gurion Canal, India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor? And why is this so important to Washington's considerations when backing the current Israeli onslaught on Gaza? Could the reason the U.S. is supporting Israel's war against Gaza full force be because of a trade route? Lately, there has been some talk of what is known as the Ben Gurion Canal project, which would essentially be an alternative trade route created through Israel-Palestine, which would be inorganically carved out of the earth to replace Egypt's Suez Canal, which of course is crucial to international shipping at this point, and would bring in significant revenue for the Israelis. In fact, after Israel and the United Arab Emirates normalized ties in 2020, there was a lot of talk about bringing this project to the forefront of the economic cooperation between the United Arab Emirates and Israel. Then in 2021, there was even more chatter about this as the United Arab Emirates and Israel wanted to reap the benefits of providing an alternate trade route to the Suez Canal. Yet there are many issues at hand, including the environmental costs. And of course, the fact that Saudi Arabia had not normalized ties with the Israelis, and to make such a project work without any problems, mainly due to the waterways that ships would have to pass through to enter the canal, Saudi Arabia was going to have to normalize ties.
Which they've been doing.
The Ben Gurion Canal project is not a new idea. According to leaked documents, in 1963, the US proposed using some 520 nuclear bombs to make it a reality. So I'm going to read that again. 520 nuclear bombs in order to build this canal.
520. And this was in 1963. That's not that long ago, Care Bear.
No, that was what, 60 years ago? So,
right.
No, 70.
Yeah.
No, 60. But so even back then, like with Palestinians living in Gaza, what was the intention? To nuke them, like literally like Hiroshima? So
I mean, those aren't even nukes. These are nukes. They're planning to use 520 nukes. Nukes.
Right.
520 of them.
So which the U.S. proposed.
Fucking canal.
Why is it?
The U.S. proposed it. Who would have made that proposal in 1963? Can someone look that up for me? Thank you very much. I'm sure that's someone we know.
Would that be Nixon?
It may not have even been him directly. It may have been, could have been Kissinger even.
Right.
So, yeah.
But anyway, the proposed trade route will run from the port city of Eilat and head north. The canal that would have to be dug would have been even longer than the Suez Canal. The U.S. and Israel did not go through with the project for several reasons. I think, as Kim, assuming that's her name, said.
Yeah.
I'm going to call it Kim. Environmental issues, one.
Kennedy. That's Kennedy admin. Yep.
So my guess, one, environmental concerns. I'm sure even back then there were concerns about that. Number two, and I think, as I said, you're going to eradicate Palestinians.
Not just, bro, the long last radiation. I mean, it's nukes. Like, I don't. Y'all know how like people are upset that we let it go. Two nukes we let go, right? Like, imagine 520 in a fucking centralized area. You don't think that might have any environmental problems? Like, that's fucked up. Okay.
However, something that was being actively discussed before the October 7th Hamas attacks was the possibility of creating a land route that would run through Israeli-occupied Palestinian territories through the port of Haifa into Europe. Called the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, the route would have revolutionized trade and was a major item on the agenda of the G20 summit in September. The U.S. was determined to make a plan a reality to shape what Benjamin Netanyahu called at the United Nations General Assembly recently the New Middle East, and was integral to the U.S. plan to combat China and its Belt and Road
Initiative, which their Belt and Road Initiative literally combines like fucking 4 continents, like with a railway and land route. That's a big deal economically. So, like,
the trade route. You got any?
No, I was waiting on you.
Okay. All right. The trade route went up in flames with the Hamas-led attack on October 7th, undermining international confidence in Israeli security. To make their project work, the U.S. and Israel will have to crush Hamas and crush Gaza and any Palestinian resistance that ever again challenge the objectives of the United States in the Middle East. So we're going to watch this clip. So it's a lot here that I've already mentioned, but they are going to mention some new information that was not necessarily in the article. So you can actually play the whole thing.
Yes, sir.
A little bit more about the Ben Gurion Canal.
Did you know the US had a plan to use nuclear bombs to build an alternative to the Suez Canal? We'll explain, but let's get some context first. The Ben Gurion Canal project, alternatively known as the Israeli Canal or Palestinian Canal, is an ambitious proposal to construct a waterway through Israel. The canal would connect the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea, serving as a competitor to Egypt's Suez Canal, which currently sees the passage of 12% of the world's trade and 10% of global oil distribution. The project is estimated to cost between $16 billion to $55 billion and would span approximately 182 miles or 293 kilometers, making it nearly 1/3 longer than the existing Suez Canal. The idea of constructing an alternative to the Suez Canal has been discussed for decades. Named after Israel's founding father and first Prime Minister, Ben Gurion, the canal aims to address the various disruptions that have plagued the Suez Canal, including blockages and prolonged closures. And yes, in 1963, the US Department of Energy and the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory developed a classified plan that suggested using 520 underground nuclear explosions to aid in the excavation process through the Negev desert hills. This plan was eventually made public in 1993. The proposed route for the Ben Gurion...
Pausing. So Yeah, so like underground nukes. And this was classified. So so they really did not want the public to know about this. So essentially, and again, I could imagine that it was a way to kind of, I don't want to say it in this way, but kill two birds with one stone in terms of alleviating the Palestinian problem and then dealing with this economic want in terms of getting this canal somewhat constructed. So yeah, but again, this was
not that long ago.
It's just not that long ago, and just the idea that, you know, even back then there was still this idea, like that's something I just can't get over. Is even back then, like there was this,
what a villain in the Fallout universe would do. Like we got to have a shipping canal, so we're gonna use nukes to do it. What? Okay. You know, get your fucking iodine pills ready, I guess.
Anyway, go ahead.
Canal would start at the Gulf of Aqaba near the port city of Eilat on the Israeli-Jordanian border. It would then traverse the Arabah Valley for about 100 kilometers between the Negev Mountains and the Jordanian highlands. The canal would turn westward before reaching the Dead Sea Basin and continue through a valley in the Negev mountain range. Finally, it would curve northward to circumvent the Gaza Strip and link up with the Mediterranean Sea. Clearly, the canal would offer similar advantages to the Suez Canal, allowing ships to bypass
they might not want to do
route around Africa's southern tip and the Cape of Good Hope. The exact details and timeline for the Ben Gurion Canal project are still under discussion, and it remains uncertain whether the project will come to fruition. However, the proposal has generated significant interest and debate given its potential impact on global trade and geopolitical dynamics. This is particularly noteworthy when considering the economic stakes involved. For context, the Suez Canal reported a record annual revenue of $9.4 billion for the fiscal year ending on June 30th, 2023, highlighting the economic potential of such a waterway. Were the Israel Canal constructed, it would redirect a substantial proportion of this revenue with obvious consequences for Egypt. Moreover, the canal would give Israel further leverage both regionally and globally, allowing it to partially control a key maritime route that could influence trade dynamics, enhance its geopolitical standing, and potentially serve as a strategic asset in diplomatic negotiations, with global trade only set to increase as states across Africa, Asia, and Latin America continue to develop. The possibility of diversifying one of the world's major naval choke points remains an attractive proposition for ensuring the resilience and efficiency of international commerce. However, the possibility of the Ben Gurion Canal's construction remains as uncertain as the current global geopolitical landscape.
Okay. Well,
so it Rob didn't mention this in the article, but this project kind of came up again because remember a couple of years ago where a boat got stuck in the Suez Canal, like
yes.
It
shut down for a while.
Yeah, for like a while. So that was more of a cause back then to to get this done in light of that incident. So I pulled this from Construction World. I guess this is an Indian base, given the I guess that's Indian newspaper
domain.
So yeah, so as we talked about, Israel thought about the idea, obviously, of potentially bombing, but digging through rock in order to do this canal. The other idea that has been floating on the table is creating a railroad. So as they mentioned in Construction World, talks about
you had it. There you go.
Talks about an alternative to the Suez Canal are ongoing, after more than 400 vessels were left stranded at either end of the canal after the 400-meter container ship Ever Given ran aground, leading to the blockage on March 23rd. Again, that was 2 years ago.
Yep.
Elliott is a southern Israeli port and resort town on the Red Sea near Jordan. In 2012, the Israeli cabinet voted to construct a railway line in Elliott to provide passenger and freight service, but subsequent studies showed that the project was not economically feasible, and the project had to be shelved. An article in the Haaretz suggests that the aftermath of the unprecedented crisis caused on the Suez Canal by the Ever Given, this would be a good time to revive the project. Instead of turning left at the north end of the Red Sea to pass through the canal, ocean-going vessels could veer right up to the Gulf of Elliott, unload their cargo adjacent trains for shipment to Ashdod or Haifa ports, and then reload onto ships bound for Europe. Shippers would save Suez Canal fees that come to hundreds, you can zoom out.
Yeah, it's close.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars, and Israel would collect a fee for moving goods between its ports. However, the reason for shelving the project is that it found economically unviable and unfeasible. A 2013 study by Professor Eran Besselson and the late Moshe Givoni found that Elliott Port could not be expanded enough to justify the cost of a railway line without creating major environmental damage.
Pause. So a railway, not enough environmental damage. 520 nukes, though, that's fine. Like, yeah. Okay.
Well,
okay.
Well, you can make the argument that they didn't, like back then, they didn't care as much about environmental issues.
Sure.
I mean,
I feel like they knew what nukes were capable of then, but you know, what do I know?
Right. Well,
it was the 60s. That was pretty recent for them. So.
Right. President of the Israel Chamber of Shipping, Yoram Sabat, has rejected the idea of using the railway line. Israel's ports are already operating at capacity and can accept more vessels without creating long lines. Today, Elliott serves mainly as a port of entry for imported vehicles from East Asia for the Israeli market. In the 1950s and 60s, when Egypt closed the Suez Canal to Israeli traffic, Elliott had played an important strategic role. A declassified memorandum reveals that the U.S. planned in 1963 to create an alternative to the Suez Canal via nearly 260 kilometers through the desert. So we know a little bit more about that. So actually, I just pulled this today. Shout out to Richie Medhurst. He actually, he has spoken a lot about this. He definitely has some clips about the Gurion Canal on his channel, but I guess he took a lot of what he said there and actually wrote up an article in the Mayadeen English publication actually last week. So it's a long article. I'm not going to read all of it, but I'll read the parts that how this affects the region itself. So, no, go back. Thank you. So Richie writes, the Suez Canal is a geostrategic asset in every sense of the word. It sits at the intersection of 3 continents and 2 bodies of water. It cuts shipping times and costs by so much that today 12% of global trade and 30% of global container traffic pass through the Suez Canal. Egyptian President El-Sisi was told in the last weeks that if he accepts Israel's plan to take Palestinians in Gaza and put them in the Sinai Desert, which Israel would pay for, then the United States would wipe Egypt's national debt. We've talked about this before. This is why Israel is absolutely obliterating Gaza. They want to seize Gaza for themselves and kill off all Palestinians and the resistance. In addition to offering debt relief, the United States and Israel have another incentive for Egypt lined up. Egypt has been suffering from acute water shortages since its neighbor Ethiopia built the so-called Renaissance Dam in 2011, cutting much-needed water from the Nile to both Sudan and Egypt. It has caused a huge dispute ever since that has yet to be resolved. Ethiopia has a significant Jewish population. The United States and Israel could theoretically lean on Ethiopia, as they have done before, and pressure it not to fill up its reservoirs, which would be detrimental to Egypt and incentivize al-Sisi to take in Palestinians from Gaza. While it is a natural human response to flee war, Palestinians have refused to abandon their homes in Gaza for a very good reason. They know that if they leave, they will never see their homes again. Most people in Gaza originally came from other parts of Palestine. They already lost their homes once to Israeli settlers from 1948 onward, and they are not willing to lose their homes again. So, in short, the implications of this canal is huge. And given especially the gas reserves were discovered recently.
Yeah.
So to top that off, plus this, Israel will get crazy paid. So, so this will give them even more incentive to do it. Environmental concerns be damned. So to conclude, despite the appeal of having Gazians move to supposedly safety in the Sinai, this would be a betrayal for the Palestinian cause and the surrender of even more land to the Zionist occupation. The Israelis would then build their Ben Gurion Canal, cementing Washington and Tel Aviv's control over the world's most important shipping lane and global maritime trade. Any thoughts?
Well, I mean, we've talked about the implications of pushing them to the Sinai. We know that they want it up to the Nile, right? This is what the settler movement wants. So, you're talking, I don't know, let's say we move a ton of really pissed off Palestinians after you've genocided most of them. You push the rest of them who are left, which are going to be children and, elderly, because that's who's not fighting, right? Wait till those kids grow up in Egypt, right there in the desert. You don't think they're going to retaliate?
Interesting you said this. I put a tweet about this, and I forgot the guy, the anti-Zionist guy. We did a TikTok of his. I showed it actually to Nuno, friend to the show, earlier today, and he said something like, well, I forgot his name, and I'm so sorry, but actually, I actually told Indy I actually want to see if we can get an interview with him, actually. But he basically said the reason why Israelis are killing off Palestinians,
children, is because they don't want them to grow up to kill them back. Yeah,
exactly. So essentially, like a second, think of it in more biblical terms, like a second Jesus.
You're lucky I'm around and follow very similar people on Twitter. I can pull that up for you.
Okay.
Here you go. No, it's going to be in this. And it's going to be Adame Media.
It's on my page.
Yeah, I got it. I retweeted it too.
Okay.
Let me just make sure I have my messages closed.
Nuno actually made a good point that it's so ironic that, Zionists are essentially waiting for their Messiah. And they are looking to very much do the very thing, because those of you who are biblical scholars, Jesus had to go to where? As a toddler? To Egypt for what reason?
Yes.
Genocide, infanticide.
Yes.
So the idea that Zion, in a way, are repeating history in terms of their fear of having, you know what? I'm not going to do it justice.
Let this guy, yep.
Yeah, he will tell you.
We need to talk about why the IOF is systemically killing babies in Gaza.
And I think this is a ex-IOF IDF guy, by the way.
Yeah.
Now, it's very important to recognize that this is not some barbaric, not thought out strategy. This is extremely deliberate, the targeting of children. Why would the IOF be so insistent on attacking hospitals, destroying hospitals, killing literal children, making sure that incubators are turned off so 30-some children who are barely even alive get executed? There's a reason behind this. And the reason is because the Israeli state knows that if these children live, they will be the biggest freedom fighters in the history of the world. And one of these children will be able to liberate Palestine. After one of these children has witnessed genocide, has literally been born into a world where everyone around them, every person that they loved, has been murdered by the state that they are subject to. These children are growing up in concentration camps. The propaganda likes to talk about terrorism and shit and how Palestinians brainwash their kids in order to hate Israel. Israel knows that it is creating the most hardcore generation of freedom fighters in Gaza right now who are going to dismantle the Israeli state by any means necessary. Even if Israel destroys Hamas, they know that these kids who are being socialized in genocide are never going to forget, and they're never going to forgive what this settler colony did to their family. And they will be the most hardcore freedom fighters and the most hardcore resistance that has ever been created in the history of the world. And the Israeli settler colonial state knows that. So they're trying to eliminate every single one of them so they don't have to deal with the consequences of one Palestinian freedom fighter in Gaza who right now is 3 years old. And in 15 years from now, they will remember how they grew up in a concentration camp and how their family, their bloodline was executed. And they are the lone survivor, that they represent their lineage, and they will avenge the blood of their martyred ancestors. There is no better way to create a freedom fighter than to systemically eradicate someone's family. And the Israeli settler colony knows that if any of these kids survive, one freedom fighter from Gaza who was socialized and born in a concentration camp, whose family was murdered, whose ancestors were displaced, they know that these kids literally pose the single greatest threat to the Israeli settler colony, and that one Palestinian survivor from Gaza will be able to liberate Palestine. That's why they're killing so many kids. That's why.
Yep.
Jesus.
Uh-huh.
Literally.
In more ways than one, yes. So
yeah, like, but I didn't make that connection until today.
Yeah.
You know, like I didn't make the
no witnesses.
Like, right.
I mean,
but
literally
the
what
idea of, like, yeah, but the idea of Israelis, and just as an aside, I was watching I guess it was a Jubilee, kind of Jubilee-esque clip where they had Palestinians and Jews talking in regards to not just this issue, but just the history, you know, surrounding. And I mean, it's pretty obvious, but I don't think there's like I don't think it has been explicitly said in this way, but I would argue, especially for like, there's hatred for each other on both sides
already. It's only going to get worse.
Well, been that you can argue been there, but especially within the last few decades, it has been exacerbated. But these guys many of them were able to recognize that was caused by essentially the British and now us, the US government, to have them fighting so that we're able to kind of take their spoils. So that's just why the US has, again, with the Ben Gurion project, quite a big interest in it, because that's capital for us. And obviously, like Israel, has to gain from it, but we're going to gain more out of it. And to continue having Israelis and Palestinians/Arabs fighting, it's only going to prove in our benefit. So that just kind of similar to what our government does to us in terms of, the poors, we're like looking at each other, in terms of, oh, this immigrant is taking our job. Oh, like this person like is doing this and that. And we're pointing fingers at each other versus, again, like Jimmy George says this all the time, we're punching each other, but not punching up. So it's the same thing against the Israel, like those generally Israelis and Arabs, they've been punching at each other. They've had this intense hatred for each other and not recognizing that it's in the West that they should be turning their eyes on and actually kicking the shit out of people in the West, because they're the ones who have actually, again, a lot of these Zionists.
Don't look at where these leaders are coming. Yes.
They're Europeans.
They're German. They're Ukrainian. They're British. They're Swedish. They're like it's literally zero of them are like native born. So right.
So these are European born. Many of them, at least the originators of Zionism, atheists, and hijacked Judaism and Christianity as well to complete their imperialist ends in the Middle East that we're seeing come to fruition today. And like I said, this is a very, very, very important story that, again, is sad that not a lot of people are talking about. But that being said, I don't think people are going to be talking about this a lot right now. But I would guarantee within the next decade,
we'll be hearing about why that canal is
like with Egypt. That, like, because Egypt is already pissed at Israel right now.
Yes, they are.
So the fact that that Israel is attempting to overtake them on the global market, which would affect BRICS as well. So this is probably our answer to hijacking BRICS.
Yep.
Is this project.
And it's economic war with China and Russia.
Right.
For sure.
So this works. So all of that to say, I can't imagine things are going to get worse.
Strap in, folks.
And I will imagine very quickly within the next few years. So, but yeah, I think watch out for this so that at least you guys are aware that of the one of many reasons why the West has a huge investment, in the region. But again, the gas was the icing on the cake. This was the whole thing this whole time.
Well, we'll ask you, please share this video, subscribe, like, or watch another video on this very channel. It's the same to YouTube as subscribing. So we would appreciate you doing that as well. But if you care about these issues, please share. We're heavily suppressed and would like to not be. So yeah, like and subscribe if you can. Thank you very much. Leave a comment down the doobly-doo.
So I think right now we have 15 people watching. So I think for our last segment, do you think that we can hit at least 20?
Probably. I would imagine so.
That.
If people tell 5 people to get here, I'm sure that's possible.
Well, I'm sure people want to get here for this last story anyhow. So
yep. So I'll check Rock and Rumble real quick. No, okay. Well, you ready for the last one?
I am.
I think it'll be pretty timely. So we're gonna hit a lot of the same topics we did a minute ago, but human shields. We've heard a lot of talks about this coming from Hasbara and the likes of them, but
who are these people?
Going to talk about the Iron Dome for a bit. You probably might have heard about the Iron Dome as kind of this impenetrable castle of a defense system that Israel has to counter any attacks from their neighbors, mostly from Iran.
Syria too.
At least that's how it's reported usually, and how, especially within the last few years, there's been issues as far as funding the Iron Dome, which has been kind of problematic with the Squad in particular. But in contrast to what you might think, it's actually, as you said, more of a paper tiger in terms of how truly much defense as it claims to be, which I also feel kind of relates to a breaking story that broke yesterday. I'm sure there's a kind of a correlate. Again, this is my speculation, but I don't think though it's going to be too far off the mark though. But we'll get into that later. So let's talk about the Iron Dome, shall we, or the myth of it thereof. So this article investigation was done by Robert Inlakesh. He's been doing the damn thing at MintPress News as of late, where he reports on the myth of the Iron Dome, the costly lie behind Israel's impenetrable, in quotes, defense. So he reports, Israel's highly touted Iron Dome air defense batteries have been misfiring and causing civilian casualties in recent weeks, sparking controversy. The air defense system has consistently presented problems, including damaging infrastructure, proving cost ineffective, and failing to engage the number of targets claimed by the Israeli military. On August 6, reports emerged that a Hezbollah drone attack on the Israeli-led city of Naraiva, I guess I would say it, resulted in civilian casualties, leaving 13 wounded and 1 critically injured. However, the Israeli military quickly clarified that the munition had hit the Route 4 highway was actually a misfired Tamir missile from a nearby Iron Dome air defense battery. The incident followed another high-profile event about 2 weeks earlier, when the projectile exploded in the Syrian Druze village of Rajal Sams, killing 12 children and injuring dozens more. While Israel blamed Hezbollah and attempted to drum up sectarian strife, the Lebanese group rejected any involvement. Locals from the illegally occupied village pointed fingers at the Iron Dome system, claiming that they saw the missile flying from the Mount Hebron military site. An Israeli paramedic also told Al-Arabi TV reporter that the shrapnel belonged to an Iron Dome missile. Despite consistent reports of Iron Dome misfires causing infrastructure damage, a notable case occurred near Tel Aviv in November. A video capturing a Tamir missile performing a 180-degree loop and exploding near a civilian area. In early December, the Israeli military announced an investigation into the malfunction after the video went viral online. The last investigation into such a malfunction was in May of last year, highlighting a recurring issue in nearly every conflict involving the Iron Dome.
Oh, There you go.
Oh. Any thoughts?
Not necessarily, not yet. I mean, figuratively triggering false alarms, we know this, right? It's also caused the deaths of people in and of itself, similar to how Ukrainian missiles recently, right?
Right.
You know, didn't it hit like a soccer match or something like that they tried to claim was Hamas, but was actually their own missile defense systems?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So, yeah, rate at four at best 4 or 5%, which you've also been seeing. Keep in mind, you have Iran has hypersonics, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
Which the Iron Dome can't do nothing about, like at all already, right? They have yet to use them. What have they been doing, Collin? Slow rolling drones, right? And they just overload the system with very cheap, like, drones.
Right. That's the thing. They haven't been doing really anything yet.
Right.
In as far as actual, like,
and then they send a couple missiles. So they send the drones in, right? And then the missiles come after the slow rolling, like, drone swarm, right?
Right.
And, like, then there's no missiles left, which these missiles for the Iron Dome, I'm sure we're going to get to, are fucking pricey.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
right. Well, not even with I wouldn't say the sneak attack, but I call it the warning shot back in, when was it? May.
Mm-hmm.
Like the fact that we had to support them, you know,
right.
and I think we made that a call back then. It was kind of like, shouldn't the Iron Dome be able to take care of all of this? But yet they needed Jordan to assist. They needed, like, the U.S. to come in and assist for essentially not nothing, but, like,
yeah,
you know, they didn't do the damage was fairly minor because they were being very careful.
minor.
But, you know, but that kind of shows even then that kind of like, what the hell is the Iron Dome there for? Like, if it was supposed to be this state of the art, like,
well, this is the thing that Russia has been saying about our equipment, and China has been saying about our equipment, right? You know what I mean? Where they're literally saying it's about warfare has changed, where it's now about how economical can you do it, right? How many, like, with less resources.
In other words, cheap.
Yes, like effective and cheap. And I hate to tell you, homie, but those AKs, I know our nice M16s and ARs are great. Trust me, I know. But, like, AKs work real well as well, you know? Like, their cheap drones work just as good as our expensive ones. Right? Like, this is what I've been trying to tell people. It's about doing it cheaply, right?
Mm-hmm.
They've talked about this with American tanks, right? Think about how you make money we are upselling our own equipment. We're throwing tons of fancy stuff they don't need, right? It's like a car salesman, you know? Like, you're getting the undercoat that's not necessary. You're getting, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's, this is what it is now. So the Iron Dome costs thousands of dollars, our money, to run, you know, like, and it's designed by, you know, our people, made tons of money off all of it. But anyway, you were saying?
Another major issue with the Iron Dome is its infrequent triggering by false alarms, leading to unexpected explosions that shook civilians and set off sirens. During the May 2021 war between Gaza and Israel, the Iron Dome failed to counter large barrages of concentrated rocket fire. This failure prompted the U.S. to urge the deployment of more batteries as a reinforcement strategy. According to the Times of Israel, the deaths of 2 Israeli women in Ashkelon during the 11th Day War may have been caused by an Iron Dome technical malfunction. While Israel claims that its Iron Dome air defense system intercepts between 90 to 99% of targets, Professor Emeritus Fyodor Postal of the Massachusetts of MIT offers a stark different assessment. I would say that the intercept rate is at best 4 or 5%. Postal said in an interview with the Boston Globe last October. He added that the interception rate is likely as low as 1%. Postal is known for debunking the effectiveness of the U.S. Patriot missile system. After analyzing evidence, he found that the air defense system had managed to shoot down 0 to 1 Iraqi Scud missiles fired at Saudi Arabia and Israel.
Okay.
Also concluded extensive research on the Iron Dome and its effectiveness during the 2012 and 2014 wars between Gaza and Israel. He concluded that the intercept performance of Iron Dome appears to be probably 5% or less. This conclusion was reached despite a range of upgrades to the air defense system between its first use in 2011 and 2014. While the Iron Dome is often hailed as a near impenetrable air defense system by both pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian political commentators, its history and independently evaluated effectiveness suggests otherwise. Despite its reputation, the Iron Dome does not appear to be as effective as claimed. The reason of its high praise is similar to that of every air defense system on Earth. They are marketed to outshine competitor systems. Zoom out, please. The Iron Dome, a product of Rafael Advanced Defense Systems and Israel Aerospace Industries, IAI, utilizes Tamir missiles co-developed by the Raytheon division of U.S. Defense, Como Gloria RTX. Israel has consistently claimed that an interception rate of over 90% since the system's development in 2011, a figure that has remained unchanged despite numerous upgrades and amendments over the past decade. A significant downside, aside from malfunctions causing civilian casualties and infrastructure damage, is the cost of using the system. In 2012, the Iron Dome was upgraded to use smaller and more cost-effective missiles due to high expenses associated with its operation. This has been a recurring issue as the system combats rockets that only cost a few $100s to produce, while the cost of a single Iron Dome missile is approximately $50,000. While many air defense systems are oversold by the military-industrial complex and numerous nations publish unrealistic information about their effectiveness, the issue in Israel may run deeper. It's such a small country, the Israeli public has been given systems like Iron Dome to believe in, a system that makes them feel safe and in which they feel they can put their faith. During past conflicts with armed resistance in the Gaza Strip, the relative ineffectiveness of the munitions fired towards Israelis has supported the claim that the Iron Dome intercepts over 90% of incoming projectiles. However, as the Israeli military now confronts more sophisticated weapons from groups like Hezbollah, the famed air defense system appears to be taking a blow to its credibility. I shall stop there for a second. But any thoughts?
Nope. Sounds about like what we were saying.
Yep. So as I said, the following is speculation on my part, but as I said, not too far off the mark. So given what we now know about the Iron Dome and basically being shit, really. So Yashar Ali tweeted this out yesterday. This was breaking news yesterday. So U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has approved the sale of $20 billion in military hardware and weapons to the Israeli government. Israeli Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant writes, "Thank you to Secretary of Defense Austin and Secretary Blinken for advancing critical force buildup initiatives that assist Israel in developing and maintaining its qualitative military edge in the region. This includes incorporating F-151As into the IAF fleet of fighter aircraft and providing critical ammunition to ensure Israel's capacities and security. As we fight to defend Israel on 7 different fronts, your message of support and commitment to Israel's security are clear. So you can kind of see there what some of the toys that they will be getting. So Zane Steiger.
God, what do you gotta
what?
I got spooked by the vile demons on my screen.
Oh.
No.
So Zane Steiger tweeted out, how are Biden and Harris working around the clock for a ceasefire when what I just mentioned was just approved today? So in other words, this
$18.8 billion. Jesus Christ. Like,
right.
Billion with a B.
Right. But Kamala cares, y'all. So let's get into this a little bit more. This is from the AP. Where Tara Kopp writes, U.S. approves $20 billion in weapon sales to Israel amid threat of wider Middle East war. So she writes, the U.S. has approved $20 billion in arms sales to Israel, including scores of fighter jets and advanced air-to-air missiles, the State Department announced yesterday. Congress was notified of the impending sale, which includes more than 50 F-15 fighter jets, advanced medium-range air-to-air missiles,
AMRAAMs,
120 milliliter tank ammunition, and high-explosive mortars and tactical vehicles, and comes at a time of intense concern that Israel may become involved in a wider Middle East war. However, the weapons are not expected to get to Israel anytime soon. They are contracts that will take years to fulfill. So
they might need a pier. Get those in there.
Well, it's to ensure that Israel will get their weapons regardless of who is president. So
yeah.
And I think from what I read, like some of these first toys will not arrive in Israel until I think around maybe 2027, I think.
Jesus Christ.
So
you minis, do your thing, would you? You know? I'm just saying.
But anyway, much of what is being sold is to help Israel increase its military capacity in the long term.
Those are going to have to be by boat. So orcas, you know what to do. You know?
The United States is committed to the security of Israel, and it is vital to U.S. national interest to assist Israel to develop and maintain a strong and ready self-defense capability. This proposed sale is consistent with those objectives, the State Department said in a release on the sale. The Biden administration has had to balance its continuous support for Israel with a growing number of calls from lawmakers and the U.S. public to curb military support there due to the high number of civilian deaths in Gaza. It has curbed one delivery of 2,000-pound weapons amid continuing airstrikes by Israel in densely populated civilian areas in Gaza. The contracts will cover not only the sale of 50 aircraft to be produced by Boeing, it will also include upgrade kits for Israel to modify its existing fleet of 24 F-15 fighter jets with new engines and radars, among other upgrades. The jets comprise the biggest portion of the $20 billion in sales, with the first deliveries expected in 2029. So I got that wrong, but all the same.
Who doesn't?
Yeah. So again, this is speculation, but going back to the Iron Dome for a second, I think just its crappy rate of success in terms of actually striking down missiles might actually be on purpose in terms of actually giving justification for us and any other Western country who wants to do their bidding to go with the guise of, oh, we need to improve it, oh, we need to upgrade it, oh, we need more weapons, just so like it can ensure the illusion of safety for Israel, but also making the military industrial complex money so that they're able to provide these contracts to Israel. And as they said, they're not going to get these within the next 5 years, at least among the first, fighter jets. So basically all this says is that for those of you who think that Kamala is actually, sincere in terms of actually doing something around this war, I mean, you can argue that this is on Biden and she may not have anything to do with this directly, but she's still involved in this. And I've yet to hear her mentioning anything regarding this 20 billion gift that we're giving to Israel, again, with our money, for the sake of basically starting World War.
Yep.
And you know who else agrees with me?
I'm sure quite a few, but particularly this lady.
Yeah, this lady who, while we've had our issues with her,
yes,
has actually spoken out correctly in regards to what's been happening in Gaza. So that that shit is not necessarily going so well.
Yes, the bare minimum position is now being easier to take. You mean?
Yes.
Gotcha.
So if you want to zoom out, so this clip was clipped from Case Study QB.
Yep.
So here is Joy Reid again, actually speaking sense in one of the rare moments that she actually does speak sense towards what the hell we're doing.
Early Saturday, an Israeli airstrike hit a school serving as a shelter in Gaza, killing at least 100 people and wounding nearly 50 others, according to Palestinian health authorities. On the same day as the strike, Vice President Kamala Harris condemned the loss of civilian life.
Yet again, there are far too many civilians who've been killed. I mean, Israel has a right to go after the terrorists that are Hamas. But as I have said many, many times, they also have, I believe, an important responsibility to avoid civilian casualties.
Uncommitted and anti-war voters see a reset with Harris on Israel and Gaza. Her language is different, capable of moving the needle and gaining favor with some of the voters who rejected President Biden over his stance on the region. But language is not enough. This was a school serving as a shelter for refugees of war, attacked during morning prayers. Witnesses said children, women.
Which is a war crime, by the way.
Yeah.
Like, let's not even talk about, like, this is a war crime. Like, granted, even if you made the defense of Hamas being there, and for what I heard with reports, I think Israel put up, like, somewhat of around 20 people who claimed to be a Hamas.
Right.
Like, pretty much all of them were not.
Yes.
Like, 3 of the people that they put up were dead already.
Right.
And, like, the rest were, like, old men. But mostly these are people who were seeking shelter in the school because they have nowhere else to go.
I've seen them try to put up stuff where it's, they fired from civilian infrastructure using like they were in civilian clothes and not in uniform, and it's like, Geneva Code says that a headband is enough, to count as uniform, right? On top of, who do you think's making their uniforms? First of all, you think that just is around? Like, you bombed everything.
Right. But again, like, bombing schools is a war crime. We should not be sending weapons.
Regardless if it states specifically, regardless of if it's being used for military installments. Regardless.
Right. So, not even the fact that, like, so just to kind of not stop Joy and Reid right there, it's like, not even the shot that they shouldn't have shot at the school at all. So, but anyway, let's go back to the rest of what she said. So I had to make that point because I think people are now forgetting, I guess, giving the fatigue that in of itself is illegal.
Stop!
That in of itself
You
is
violated the law.
Like, if Hamas was there, that's no reason to knock out a school.
Yeah.
Women and old people were inside sleeping, and that the school was hit without an evacuation warning from the IDF. President Biden has faced months of public pressure to cut off the supply of weapons to Israel amid its war on Gaza, which has killed about 40,000 people since October. It's why the squad, all elected officials of color, are demanding a ceasefire, despite being targeted for removal from office by staunch supporters of the Netanyahu government and the ongoing bombardment of Gaza. The world is on edge right now, and rightly so. The U.S. is sending more troops to the Middle East to bolster defenses as Israel braces for an attack by Iran. So far, Vice President Harris has shown herself to be better positioned than President Biden to bring the party together on this issue. But we have to remember, Harris is still the vice president serving in the Biden administration. So her policy, should it differ from Biden's, isn't anything that she can implement now. Though it's absolutely fair for people to ask, why are we giving bombs to Israel? And would she keep that policy in place as president? These questions will surely be visible during the Democratic National Convention next week. And how the party answers could impact the election, not to mention the lives of so many Palestinians who have suffered for much too long. For God's sake, this needs to end. And that is tonight's readout.
Any questions?
Yeah. No, I don't have any questions. Do you?
No, not necessarily.
Well, let's hope. I know we have a few folks in the space who are going to be heading to Chicago next week. We ain't, but it'll be very interesting to see. I'm sure there's going to be protests there. I'm also sure that there's going to be ways that the Democrat Party are going to do to negate those voices. But no, I do think that the question that Jory should be asking is something that Kamala should be asked is, what's your plan to get a ceasefire? Especially given that Israel, basically took out, the Hamas negotiator. And now they're saying Hamas, and the people are like, well, Hamas is not coming to the negotiating table. Yeah, they've made offers 9 fucking times. And Israel has made it a point to basically be like, we don't care. We're not interested. So why should Hamas at this point come to... I'm just speaking truth here. Why should Hamas bother at this point when Israel has not been working in good faith? They've already said they're not interested in a ceasefire. So my thing is right now is if Israel has a right to defend itself, given what they just did to Iran, doesn't Iran have that same right? Right? That kind of what makes sense to me, but I'm not sure about everyone else.
Right. But hold on. I don't know why that came up. Yeah, there we go. And you probably want it like this anyway.
Yeah.
So I was trying to add back, we need to put that scrolling fair use stuff over things again. That would probably help too. But I was just trying to do that while I was thinking about it. No, go away, Joy Reid. I think that's it, right? I think that's all you have in here.
Yeah, that's all I got.
Cool.
So you have to switch out. You have to
do this, and so it's not backwards.
Yeah.
There you go.
There you go. And then you can take off the. But anyway, let us know in the comments if you are planning to go to Chicago. Since that's next week, if you don't give a damn, or more importantly, what questions would you, if you had the option, if you had the time, if you could ask Vice President Harris in terms of what she's doing, in terms of ending this conflict, this assault in the Middle East? And how do you feel about what Inlakesh reported on regarding the Iron Dome? Let us know in the chat or let us know in the comments if you're watching the clips after this. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to fight the suppression that YouTube has made clear that they are going to do for us for sure. And make sure you leave a comment. Please help us get to 3K. And don't forget to make sure you donate. You can go to the QR code on the screen, or you can go to the link that you see on the screen at the Ko-fi link. Or you can go to our description and you can find all the links of where you can give towards the channel and to the network. I think that's it. Thank you, guys.
Who are these people?
Warning, if you're, sensitive to sexual assault testimonies and things like that, this might be a tougher read for you. But I think it's doable for most people. It's just, unfortunately, this is the reality that's happening in the area. But this is from Robert Inlakesh. Gotta get that right. This is over in MintPress, which I'm just going to use the full word. I know that word frustrates people, so that's why I gave the warning. But systemic rape allegations against Israel meet a deafening silence. So, as expected. But this is January 2nd, so, things have happened since then. We'll get to it. But he writes, a flood of devastating new testimonies documenting the systemic sexual abuse of Palestinian men and women by Israeli soldiers has surfaced in recent weeks. Yet, as these harrowing accounts gain traction amongst human rights groups and international organizations, Western media has conspicuously turned its focus elsewhere, amplifying Israel's poorly corroborated claims against Hamas. Following a raid on Canal Hospital in the northern Gaza Strip on December 28, Euromed Human Rights Monitor published a report documenting harrowing testimonies of sexual abuse by Israeli soldiers. Eyewitnesses' accounts describe how female medical workers and patients were rounded up at gunpoint, coerced into removing their headscarves, and forced to strip naked. Witnesses also reported that these women were subjected to degrading verbal abuse throughout the ordeal. A soldier forced a nurse to take off her trousers, then placed his hand on her. When she tried to resist, he struck her hard across the face, causing her nose to bleed. A female survivor of the Canal Hospital raid recounted to a Euromed Monitor team. Eyewitness testimonies further detailed male soldiers engaging in groping, beating, and forcibly sexualizing women, as well as ripping clothes from women's chests when they refused to strip. These harrowing testimonies align with a documented pattern of abuse. In February 2024, Euromed Monitor reported similar accounts from female detainees in Gaza. Among them, a 45-year-old woman identified as NH recounted how she was threatened with rape and told that I would not see my children if I disobeyed the soldiers' orders. In February 2024, United Nations officials formally acknowledged the growing body of evidence pointing to sexual violence against Palestinian women in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. They confirmed that at least 2 cases of rape have been documented, marking a critical official recognition of the abuse. On June 12th, the United Nations released a human rights report that detailed systemic sexual and gender-based violence perpetuated by Israeli soldiers against Palestinians since October 7th. The report concluded that Palestinians have been subjected to a range of abuses, including forced public nudity, forced public stripping, sexualized torture and abuse, and sexual humiliation and harassment, both online and in person. And if you think that sounds familiar to Abu Ghraib, guess where they learned it from. So, par for the course. But in March, Canadian physicians who had worked in Gaza came forward with harrowing evidence. These are Canadian physicians, okay? Evidence of rape against Palestinian women, urging an investigation into the atrocity. So this isn't like the Palestinian women. I mean, some of them are, for sure, speaking up. But this is like other physicians in the area are like, hey, this is happening. So one physician recounted a particularly devastating case in which a woman was reportedly raped for 2 days until she lost her ability to speak. At the notorious Sid Taiman detention center, where Israeli soldiers detained Palestinian civilians from Gaza without charge, UNRWA documented a harrowing testimony from a female prisoner. They asked the soldiers to spit on me, saying, "She is a bitch, she is from Gaza." They were beating us as we moved and saying they would put pepper on our sensitive parts. They pulled us, beat us. They took us in the bus to the Damon prison after 5 days. A male soldier took off our hijabs, and they pinched us and touched our bodies, including our breasts. We were blindfolded, and we were feeling them touching us, pushing our heads to the bus. We started to squeeze together to try to protect ourselves from the touching. They said, "Bitch, bitch." They told the soldiers to take off their shoes and slap our faces with them. The Sid Diamond detention facility became the center of international outrage after 10 Israeli soldiers were arrested for the brutal gang rape of a Palestinian detainee held without charge. The attack was captured on film, was further compounded by widespread Israeli public support for the perpetrators. This support came from members of the government, media, and the so-called right to rape protests, which defended the soldiers' actions. Adding to the disturbing nature of the incident, Israel's Haninu Legal Aid Organization, which represented 4 of the accused soldiers, claimed their clients were acting in what? Self-defense.
For what? For how?
Yeah. Please explain. Yeah, I wish I knew. So
I would love to hear the mental gymnastics of how they would defend that. I would love to hear it.
Anyway, Sid Taiman was not alone in facing accusations of systemic sexual abuse. As early as January of 2024, the Public Committee Against Torture in Israel, which I'm surprised there is one, provided testimonies in a report about systemic torture. One prison, held in Ketzayat prison, revealed the following. Wardens would conduct searches while the prisoners were naked, placed naked prisoners against each other, and placed the aluminum device used in the searches in their buttocks. In another instance, the wardens passed a card in a prisoner's buttocks. All of this took place in sight of other prisoners and wardens, while the wardens took pleasure in beating the prisoners' genitals. Palestinian lawyer Khaled, I'm going to butcher that last name, an Israeli citizen, revealed a harrowing, I would imagine, Mahachne, account from a survivor of the Ofer detention center in the West Bank. He cited the testimony of a 27-year-old Palestinian inmate who was subjected to brutal sexual violence. And I quote, "A pipe from a fire extinguisher was used on a handcuffed prisoner, forcing him to lie on his stomach, stripping him of all his clothes, and inserting the pipe of the fire extinguisher into the prisoner's rectum, then activating the extinguisher in front of the eyes of the other prisoners." So, yeah, not great. The numerous reports by ostensibly objective human rights groups and international organizations documenting Israeli systemic sexual abuse against Palestinians are supported by survivor testimony, eyewitness accounts, video footage, photographic evidence, and admissions from Israeli sources. Israel's claims of mass rape by Palestinians lack similar evidence. In fact, several of the purported Israeli eyewitnesses making these accusations have been exposed for fabricating their stories. Israeli emergency workers have implicated its manufacturing hoaxes, including the widely circulated claims of 40 beheaded babies hung on clothing lines, and fetuses removed from their mother's wombs. According to a UN report by Pramila Patton on October 7th, one such crime scene had been altered by a bomb squad and the bodies were moved. Additionally, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu fabricated a story about 2 boys killed in an attic, which he used in his address to the U.S. Congress in July 24th. Kakov Al-Qaim Levy was given a prominent platform in Western corporate media for her civil commission, forced to investigate allegations of sexual abuse by Hamas against Israelis. Israel's most trusted news outlet, Haaretz, even reported that she collected testimony after testimony, despite later acknowledging that no direct testimonies had been taken. So, any questions so far, Care Bear? I know it's heavy, but
no,
I can continue. Yeah. After the Hamas mass rape allegations spread across U.S. media and were echoed by Western politicians, Levy, previously cited as an expert, was exposed by Israeli media for fraud and scamming donors. Ultimately, nothing emerged for her alleged investigative efforts. A new Israeli government report submitted to the UN relies on second-hand accounts from physicians and healthcare workers who interacted with former Israeli captives, but does not directly quote or name the individuals involved. While the report aligns with some previous findings, it introduces a new and striking claim. 2 Israeli teenagers were allegedly forced to perform sexual acts on one another. Notably, this claim was absent from the initial submission by the Israeli Health Ministry and did not surface during the year-old prisoner exchange between Hamas and Israel. Israel's claims about mass sexual violence lack any hard evidence, victims, or testimonies to corroborate them. Yet, each new claim is covered uncritically by the Western corporate media. On the other hand, mountains of evidence documenting the systemic sexual violence committed against Palestinians are ignored in what can only be described as a deliberate cover-up. So, which we're about to get to that UN probe, right? So, this is out of SheerPost. It's by the Cradle, to be specific. Israeli officials have obstructed a UN investigation into alleged sexual crimes committed by Hamas fighters during the 7th October 2023 Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, fearing this would open the door to a probe into the rampant allegations of sexual violence against Palestinians inside Israeli torture camps. According to the report, the Israeli daily Haaretz, Tel Aviv rejected a request from Pramila Patten, the UN Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence and Conflict, to investigate the allegations against Hamas after she established that a necessary condition would be to access Israeli detention centers to probe claims against Israeli soldiers. So they were like, nah, I'm out. If you're going to do that, we don't need that. The clear concern is that Israel will be the one to be added to the blacklist of entities and countries that engage in sexual violence and conflicts, while the terrorist organization Hamas will actually remain off the list. Mia Shrakin, director of the International Department of the Israeli Women's Lobby, told Haaretz, which is just, Patton's office previously confirmed plans to explore a future mission to the region following invitations from both the PA, we're going to get to the PA in a segment later, and the Israeli government. So, Thursday reports comes mere days after Israeli prosecutor Moran Gaz confirmed during an interview with Yediot Ahronoth that no allegations of rape or sexual assault by Hamas on October 7th have been filed. In the end, we don't have any complaints, which was presented in the media compared to what will eventually come together will be entirely different, she said, adding that her office approached women's rights organizations and asked for cooperation. They told us that no one had approached them, she stressed. Multiple media outlets have debunked claims of Hamas rape on October 7th. Nevertheless, since the start of the Israeli genocide in Gaza, human rights organizations have documented dozens of accounts of the rampant sexual violence inflicted on Palestinians. In August, Israel's NGO B'Tselem published a report titled Welcome to Hell, containing testimonies from 55 Palestinians detailing incidents of torture, rape, violence, humiliation, starvation, and denial of adequate medical treatment, which I do believe we covered that, correct?
Yes, we did.
This report came days after the military police arrested 8 Israeli prison guards on suspicion of raping a male Palestinian prisoner at the notorious Sid Taiman camp. A doctor at the Army Detention Center facility at Sid Taiman, so this is the doctor at that facility, Professor Yoel Donchin, said that after seeing the Palestinian detainee who was gang raped, he, quote, couldn't believe an Israeli prison guard could do such a thing. What? When? You saw it on camera. You still don't believe it? If they maintain a hospital only for the sake of defending ourselves at the ICJ, that's no good, the doctor said. Which, like, that's what he's saying it was. That whole hospital for them is just so that they don't get called out on not having it. Following the guards' arrest, Israeli settlers, far-right activists, and Knesset members started riots breaking into Sid Taiman and the nearby Bet Laid army base in defense of the soldiers. Even after the rioters breached the entrances, no one was arrested or even identified by Israeli police. I wonder why. Closing thoughts, Care Bear?
We'll get to this later, but again, as I said in the first segment, the idea of a ceasefire, while it sounds good to many people who on a surface level have called for it, and think that, it can lead to more. The reality is, at minimum, it's the idea of, okay, some, from what I'm seeing online at least, not all, but some of the Palestinian people who were imprisoned, most, if not all, under no fault of their own, will be released. But there's no account of the torture that they've gone through, the pain and the ridicule that they have gone through, no accountability for what the Israeli soldiers did to them. I haven't heard anything of that. So the idea that you think that a ceasefire is actually going to do something, it doesn't account for anything like this. And I'll argue this has been happening for decades. This is not recent. So, okay, yeah, you're going to have prisoners set free, but many of them are so damaged that how they're even going to function. And besides all that, like, you're giving these prisoners, these detainers, Israeli detainers, the option to do it again, given the opportunity. Because again, a ceasefire is just that, is a temporary pause. So when everything starts back up, which it will, either these people that they let go will probably be back in there, or there'll just be more people to put in their place where they're able to torture.
Yeah.
Rinse, lather, repeat. So it's just frustrating and honestly kind of disgusting that this kind of behavior is kind of encouraged. But then again, we do the same. Let's keep it real.
Oh yeah, go look at American prisons.
Right. We do the same
see
shit.
See what guards do there.
Right. So, to implicate Israel is to implicate ourselves. So there's absolutely no way that we're actually going to call out probably our closest ally, quote unquote, at this point.
Yeah, it's just sad and maddening, but it's definitely the reason we're demonetized, talking about stories like that. So, appreciate any monetary help you can give by scanning that QR code, going to the URL ko-fi.com/indienewsnetwork. Appreciate any support you can give. Links are always in the description below, as they frequently are. And if you can't give, we appreciate just some algorithm boosting, liking and subscribing, hitting the share button, leaving a comment, letting us know what you think. And I apologize for the heavy segment, but otherwise, thanks for watching.
these people?
I brought this, Collin, because I have spoken a couple of times about, look into who started Hamas, right? And yes, I might be incorrect. So, I brought this to kind of, fix some of that. So this is from Robert Inlakesh. Right. Make sure I get that right, because I always want to revert back to how I said it before. Over at MintPress. And he pulled this out. He's got some video to go with it, so we'll let him intro this a bit.
Shortly after the attack on October 7, you may have heard the argument that the Palestinian party responsible, Hamas, had been funded by Benjamin Netanyahu to prevent a peace agreement with the Palestinian Authority, and that Hamas itself was a creation of Israel, with clips like these doing the rounds.
What if I told you that Israel helped create Hamas?
If you look at the history, you'll find out that Hamas was encouraged and really started by Israel because they wanted Hamas to counteract Yasser Arafat.
But what if I told you that Hamas was not created by Israel, and that this idea is an exaggerated misinterpretation of history? Yet, if this is the case, then where do such claims come from, and is there any truth to them? In order to answer these questions, we have to go back to 1973, when a Palestinian member of the Muslim Brotherhood named Sheikh Ahmed Yassin started the Mujama al-Islamiyya, an Islamic social organization that would aim to push a conservative interpretation of Sunni Islam inside of the Gaza Strip. At this time, Israel internally occupied Gaza and sought to suppress Palestinian resistance groups in line with the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, which was actively fighting Israel from its headquarters in Lebanon. So, when the Mujama, colloquially referred to in Gaza as the Ikhwan or Brotherhood, were seeking to build an Islamic civil society sector, were preaching nonviolence against the occupier, and acting in a hostile manner to Palestinian secular nationalists, socialists, and communists, Israel saw an opportunity.
So, any questions so far? Cool.
Shortly after...
Well, let's continue then. According to reports from the Washington Post at the time, Israeli occupation forces showed leniency toward Mujama activists. Former Israeli Brigadier General Yitzhak Segev claimed that the Israeli government allocated a budget of hundreds of thousands of dollars to support some of the group's project. However, most of Mujama's funding reportedly came from the Arab Gulf states and the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood in 1979. Israel formally recognized the Mujama as an official organization, allowing it to operate freely without interference from Israeli authorities, right?
Okay.
So, the evidence has frequently been cited as the basis for claims that Hakrat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya, or Hamas, was a creation of Israel. Also, clap for me for getting that one right. A closer examination suggests that the conclusion likely arises from a misinterpretation of historical events. The notion that Israel established, controlled, or still influences Hamas today appears to overlook the complex realities surrounding the group's formation and development. In reality, while the Mujama initially operated under the influence of Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood, aiming to establish a Palestinian branch to Islamicize society and provide essential services, the group encountered significant challenges. These obstacles eventually led to a shift in its strategy, pushing it away from the original goals it had been created to pursue. Over time, this evolution will lead to the emergence of more militant posture, marking a departure from its earlier focus on social media and religious conservatism. This transformation, driven by both internal and external pressures, set the stage for the group's eventual transition into Hamas. So, any questions before we move on?
I might save it. No, I can ask now. I'm just curious. How did Robert figure this out? I'm just like,
yeah,
or what made him think to do this
research. Yeah.
I mean, because I will admit, even for me, like saying, like Israel created like there was something even in that that didn't seem right to me. Like,
sure.
It just felt like there was a lot, even to me, and I never said it because I don't think I can necessarily pinpoint to it, but it just like it just seemed like there was a lot more to the issue than what I think it just seemed too simplistic to me that Bibi actually financed Hamas in an attempt, to prevent, essentially, like the argument was
PLO and
right, like any resistance groups from actually like being radicalized, and now it's basically become a Frankenstein of Bibi's creations, so to speak. But
right.
I just felt, even in saying that, it was just kind of like there seems to be a lot more, as there usually is, to the issue than what is being presented. Even in this, people are not necessarily saying that Bibi essentially kind of created.
Well, and it's they do state that they did get some funding from them, and they let them but it's a little bit misconstrued as to how that actually happened and what effect that had.
Right, but like he was the only financier,
right,
which
was not the case.
Right.
Yeah.
Tactics. The Mujahma succeeded at building schools, mosques, libraries, and helped found the Islamic University of Gaza, also building religious institutions and operating medical clinics and orphanages and providing food and aid to those in need. In doing so, it gained a base of supporters. However, another organization also began forming in the late 1970s, declaring itself Palestinian Islamic Jihad, PIJ, in 1981, started by Dr. Fathi Shaqaqi, who...
Now, notice how they actually gained power, by the way. I wish some people would take into consideration how they did that when trying to get power here. What did they do? Formed schools, universities.
Right.
That
to me makes more sense.
Yeah.
Right. That makes more sense in terms of what we've been talking about. It's like, how are you going to liberate people? You educate them, you feed them, you make them feel human.
Yeah.
Right. Which is something that we know that Israel, they're against it because they don't want essentially the next generation to uprise and essentially overtake them in terms of the land grab that they've been trying to get on within the region forever. So in this case, that makes more sense because they're developing infrastructure that Israel has wanted to do, and so essentially it's just they're in the way, infrastructure wise, education, and you can't have that if you're trying to overtake them. So this is where the US comes in to, with the manpower that we have to essentially level the place. So that makes more sense to me than just Bibi financing Hamas. So,
was influenced by the Muslim Brotherhood too, but also drew inspiration from the Brotherhood too, who Palestinian Islamic Jihad, PIJ, in 1981, started by Dr. Fathi Shaqaqi, who was influenced by the Muslim Brotherhood too, but also drew inspiration from the Islamic revolutionaries in Iran that overthrew the Shah and preached armed resistance. Prior to the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982, mass protests also broke out in Gaza and the West Bank, as the occupying forces began to become more extreme in their methods of violence in the occupied territories. Following the defeat of the PLO in 1982 in Lebanon, after Israel killed around 20,000 Palestinians and Lebanese, later overseeing massacres of civilians in refugee camps like Sabra and Shatila, at a time when the PLO fighters had fled to North Africa, many PLO-aligned members switched to support PIJ. While the Mujama argued its belief that uniting the Muslims and creating a perfect Islamic society was an essential precursor to overthrowing the occupiers, Palestinian Islamic Jihad was preaching armed resistance, sometimes causing street clashes between the two Islamic groups. In the mid-1980s, under the supervision of Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, the Mujama began to set up a security apparatus called Al-Majd, leading to the arrest of Yassin and scores of others involved who were smuggling weapons into the Gaza Strip at the time.
So, yeah, that's where we stand. Let's continue a little bit. So, in 1987, in reaction to Israel's illegal occupation, the first Intifada erupted across the West Bank and Gaza Strip. This mass uprising, initially characterized by widespread nonviolent protests, escalated tensions between Palestinians and Israeli forces. Notably, an armed clash between PIJ fighters and Israeli forces in Gaza's Shuhaya neighborhood preceded the broader uprising, helping to grow PIJ's following as the group continued to advocate armed resistance. Later that same year...
But notice the uprisings were nonviolent. At least
initially, yeah. So, and they probably weren't listened to, and we know the language of the unheard. So, later that same year, a significant shift occurred within the Mujama. Sheikh Ahmad Yassin, who had previously led the group's religious and social initiatives, along with others, concluded that the time had come to take up arms. As a result, the Mujama transformed, and Hamas, Harakat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya, or the Islamic Resistance Movement, was officially born. The group's leadership embraced armed resistance, marking the beginning of Hamas as a militant and political force in the Palestinian struggle against Israeli occupation. The emergence of Hamas in the late 1980s must be understood within a broader historical and political context of widespread disillusionment and shifting ideologies in the Middle East. The group, along with other Islamic resistance movements, rose during a period of profound despair and frustration among Palestinians, similar to the way various Palestinian Marxist movements, like the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, had gained prominence after the downfall of Egypt's President Gamal Abdel Nasser and the collapse of his vision of socialist Arab nationalism. In the wake of Egypt's crushing defeat in the June 1967 Six-Day War, during which Israel launched a surprise attack, Nasser's once dominant ideology began to lose credibility across the Arab world. This ideological vacuum spurred the growth of alternative revolutionary movements. One such outcome was that George Habash, who had led the Arab nationalist movement, formed the Marxist PFLP, which sought to pursue Palestinian liberation through leftist ideals. Similarly, Hamas emerged from the remnants of the Mujama at a time when Islamist movements began to resonate more strongly with many Palestinians, offering both religious and armed resistance as an alternative path to achieving independence. An ideological shift was underway within Palestine after the defeat of 1982, when Israel's military operations in Lebanon devastated Palestinian resistance forces. In this environment of rising despair and heightened Israeli repression, a social group that emerged as the Palestinian offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood seized the opportunity to establish itself as the leading force in a new wave of Islamic resistance movements. This occurred as Israel's brutality was intensifying, and the secular leadership of the Palestinian Liberation Organization was seen as weakened. The suggestion that Israel created Hamas by exploiting the Mujama's activities in the 1970s and 80s ignores the broader context of Palestinian resistance. This argument diminishes the group's significance in the national liberation struggle and oversimplifies its emergence as a major force against Israeli occupation. While Hamas's role as a political entity has been contested within Palestinian society, especially in Gaza, its armed wing enjoys widespread support for its role in resisting Israeli occupation. This support reflects the broader Palestinian desire for autonomy and the right to resist occupation, even amid internal political differences.
That I would argue it's a liberation that they want.
Yeah. And regardless of who's running the country, they still want the right to resist the occupation they are under.
Right.
So, despite Israeli efforts to build localized Palestinian administrative bodies, part of a broader strategy to ease the administrative burden on the occupation and undermine the influence of the PLO, their stance shifted dramatically once weapons entered the equation. Initially, groups like the Mujama were encouraged to assist in these efforts, but the moment the group began arming itself, the Israeli authorities recognized the threat and responded accordingly. Yep. This shift illustrates how Israel's support was conditional, aimed at weakening the PLO without anticipating the potential for armed resistance from them. Right. So, it's the minute they started to fight back, they were like, we ain't fucking helping you no more. So, but Israel's miscalculation of the effects of the 1982 war in Lebanon, coupled with the belief that defeating the PLO would lead to the collapse of armed resistance, underpinned their failure to anticipate the rise of groups like Hezbollah and Hamas. This belief was articulated by then Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who stated in 1982, if you take away the Soviet Union and its chief proxy, the PLO, international terrorism would collapse. Where have we fucking heard that before? He said the same thing, right?
Right.
Like, we just get rid of Hamas and suddenly terrorism's not here.
Right.
Okay. However, the Israeli invasion of Lebanon did not lead to the disintegration of resistance, but instead created space for groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Palestine to grow and fill the void left by the PLO's defeat.
Right.
So, yeah. Any questions so far?
I mean, this sounds like Black Panthers to me. Like,
sounds like the IRA. Sounds like
to that.
Yep. Very similar, no?
This is why we need to learn history, folks.
And this is just part 1. Imagine what part 2 and 3 have to offer. So, but this is the part 1. He's doing part 2 and 3, supposedly. So we'll keep an eye out for him.
Oh, we gotta get him on. Like, again, I'm just really like, what caused him to think like, something doesn't feel right. Let me research this a little more and see if I can.
Yeah, he probably knew a bit of it and saw people making the mistake and went, "Well, let me teach them." They're gonna learn today. But anyway, we'll let him finish this out.
80s to formulate an argument that suggests Israel created Hamas, delegitimizes the group's role in the national liberation struggle, and robs Palestinians of their autonomy under such a narrative. While many Palestinians, especially in Gaza, have historically been opposed to Hamas as a political force, they overwhelmingly support the armed wing of the group and its role in fighting their occupiers. Despite the fact that the Israelis, who were attempting to build localized Palestinian administrative bodies to ease the administrative burden of the occupying authorities and undermine the PLO, had actively encouraged groups like the Mujama to help achieve this goal, it is very clear that as soon as weapons became involved, their attitudes changed. This had more to do with the fact that Israel did not anticipate the kind of impact that their war in Lebanon would have, or that Islamic resistance groups like Lebanese Hezbollah and Hamas would emerge to fill the gap left by a defeated PLO and leftist groups. Exemplifying this, here's Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu in 1982.
If you take away the Soviet Union and its chief proxy, the PLO, international terrorism would collapse.
Simply switch the words Soviet Union for Iran and PLO for Hamas, and you'll find that the Israeli argument against Palestinian resistance has not changed at all. Saying this, if the argument was that because of Israel, Hamas exists, then this would be accurate. But it would also be accurate for every single group resisting Israel. But what about the Oslo Accords, the suicide bombings, Palestinian civil war, and Israel's influence on all of that? Or what about the Qatari aid money being transferred into Gaza in suitcases? Well, stay tuned for part 2 and 3 as we look deeper into the history of whether Israel really helped to create and prop up Hamas.
Robert, we want you on the show. Come on.
Yeah, dude. Feel free to come on. We'll talk to you about it.
We love your work.
So,
come on.
Yeah. Listen to the man. Listen to thems. Well, anything to say? You know.
I am intrigued and I am looking forward to the rest of it. But you know, actually, I just reading Golden Monarch's comment in the chat. They said, if Israel truly created Hamas, it would explain how many pro-crypto establishment articles painted Hamas as having digital wallets, which, okay, has to first come from the IDF. So...
Yeah, and, you know, with crypto, there's a ton of gray area with all that, too, you know? Like, they could have been equally exploited through it, not knowing, you know? But, yeah, I mean, it's just that history's good to learn, you know? Yeah. Otherwise, we are doomed to repeat it. And even though we know it, we a lot of times are still doomed to repeat it.
Well, I think this is an example of why when independent media is good, this is why it's valid, because you're not going to hear this. Like, most people are not going to hear this. And it's almost sad to say, like, not even people in the independent media space is going to report on this, much less talk about it in this way.
No.
So it just
I got time, though.
Yeah, it just makes me appreciate more for journalists like Robert, who I think, you know, and we reference him a lot and we really enjoy his work, but he's definitely showing, like, he has a curiosity to kind of go deeper and just kind of see, like, is this the talking point that you might hear in mainstream? Is this really true? And, like, you know, really willing to kind of dig deeper into, like, a lot of these topics to really uncover more of what is not necessarily being said, even within our space. So, again, I really appreciate him, you know, going this route and challenging me in terms of what I've even said online, and even you, like, regarding Hamas, you know. But I do think it's interesting, like, essentially the idea of Hamas is kind of based out of the idea of, you know, like, not oppression, but liberation, like wanting better for your people and wanting your people to be educated and, as I said, fed, and, you know, wanting them essentially to be human. So I like, not to say I like it in comparison, but, like, I appreciate this more in terms of, and that makes more sense to me versus having, like, BB just kind of be, like, in the center of it, which he is, but not in the way that I think even I or you believed initially. So so I really appreciate Robert really
and
doing that.
Go show him some appreciation. Go click that article down there. I know MintPress and Consortium, I do believe, are always requiring some resources, so go help them out.
Right.
You know, but you know, I found it interesting for sure reading through it, and I don't know the history of the region enough a lot of times to say stuff, so helpful to get some more information.
Right. I think this segment was good, as we call these kind of segments, like, evergreen, in terms of like, these are the segments that we love doing in terms of, like, they will stand the test of time. So, like, you can watch this 5, 10, 15 years from now, and I'm sure
it still apply.
it will still apply. So
yeah, hopefully.
Yeah. So, well, I would argue in terms of if Palestine is ever liberated and they manage to rebuild and kind of retell the history in their own terms, I'm sure work like Robert and his journalistic expertise would kind of lead into this in terms of how they fought in terms of gaining the liberation that they were seeking. So the way he's kind of building into that in terms of if Palestine is ever restored, that this can be the basis of that education there, and hopefully throughout the world in terms of really understanding really the true nature of Hamas, and it's not like this terrorist entity that our leaders are making them out to be. Even the ones who might say, I think kind of more in the liberal terms of, they're terrorists, but they may not necessarily be that bad type of thing, But yeah, really good. Way to go, Robert.
Yep.
Like I said, we would love to have you on, talk more about this. So if anyone has his contact, tag him. We would love to have him on. To talk about this more.
But I mean, talking about these things is why we're demonetized. So you can scan that QR code on your screen, go to that URL, ko-fi.com/indienewsnetwork, or links are always in the description below. If you don't want to do those things, we make it easy for you. But, if you can't give monetarily, we appreciate just, sharing with your friends, leaving comments, liking. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that little red button down there. Make that number go up. We're trying to get to 3K. But, otherwise, thanks for watching.
Who are these people?
Last week, Care Bear, we covered, well, not last week, a couple weeks ago, right? We covered the history of Hamas, right? Because clearly most people don't know about it. Clearly I don't know not much about it as I should. So figured we do some more history lessons, right? So Robert Inlakesh, now new Indie Media Award honoree. So
yeah, by the way, watch so Indie and Reef released this new class of honorees at the Indie Media Awards that they premiered on Sunday, so definitely check that out.
Check that out.
And clips from that stream will be forthcoming, but Robert has, I think, we've featured a lot of his articles over the past year. So I think he's definitely well deserving. And I think when we talked about it, like, he was immediately like, yes. So he definitely deserves it just due to his work, especially his reporting and deep dives in terms of the history surrounding Israel, Palestine, and what's happening now. So we appreciate you, Robert. We would love to have you on to interview you if you ever do watch this. We would love to have you on and interview you, man, but we really appreciate you.
Yep.
Did Israel?
Well, we'll let him speak on this matter and get us started. Give you volume and
Israel really use Hamas to derail the Oslo peace process and kill the two-state solution? Well, I'm Robert Inlakesh, and over a year into the Gaza genocide, the Hamas movement that leads the armed resistance against Israel's assault is still misunderstood. In light of media mischaracterizations, we continue to see Hamas compared to ISIS, blamed for Israel's actions, and there are those who even say Israel created and continues to control the group. A few weeks ago, we published part 1 of this video series where I explained the origins of Hamas, separating fact from fiction, regarding the funding of the group, its historical climate, and how it emerged as the most popular Islamic party in Palestine. So, in this video, I'll seek to explain what's wrong with the argument that Hamas was responsible, along with an Israeli right-wing fringe, for derailing the so-called peace talks aimed at securing a two-state solution. But, as usual, to address such a question, we have to turn back to history.
So that's what we're going to do. But do go check out our coverage of his last installation of this. Should be able to find that on the channel pretty easy. But he writes, when the Declaration of Principles was signed between the Palestinian Liberation Organization and Israel in September 1993, I was born in March, Collin, of that year. So that I would have been like a couple months, you know? It marked the end of the first Intifada. The mass Palestinian uprising brought Hamas to prominence as a political force. Many viewed the Oslo Accords as a beacon of hope, a chance for peace in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. However, the path to failure had been set long before Hamas became a significant factor. To understand why Oslo ultimately failed, we must rewind to 1974, when PLO chairman Yasser Arafat addressed the UN, famously offering peace while upholding the right to armed struggle. This followed the PLO's issuance of a 10-point plan, which many saw as paving the way for dialogue with Israel. Israel's response was to reject what it described as a terrorist group's peace offensive. What? Huh? What the hell is a peace offensive, Collin? Like, does that make sense to you? Like,
no, it all sounds like an oxymoron.
Yes,
to me,
quite literally. Interestingly, Israel Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, who once labeled the PLO a terrorist organization, would later go on to sign the Oslo Accords with Arafat. So, what changed, Care Bear? What do you think did that? Well, you're gonna find out.
بغصن الزيتون في يدي وببندقية الثائر في يدي فلا تسقط الغصن الأخضر من يدي.
The Israeli response to this was rejection of what they called a terrorist group's peace offensive, expressed here by Israel's Yitzhak Rabin, who actually would later go on to sign the Oslo Accords with Yasser Arafat.
And so you have the statement of the Security Council chairman, which speaks about inviting the representatives of the terror organizations.
So, what changed? Well, by 1981, the Arab League had ratified the Fez initiative advocating for a two-state solution, which the PLO was ready to consider. However,
so did you catch that? What's in there? So Israel withdraw from all captured Arab territories, including East Jerusalem, the dismantling of Israeli settlements in Arab territories, the assurance of the freedom of worship for all religions, the recognition of the rights of the Palestinians for self-definition, which will be implemented through their exclusive representative, the PLO, a several-month transition period for Gaza and the West Bank under the auspices of the UN, the establishment of a Palestinian state with Jerusalem as its capital, the guarantee of the UN Security Council for the peace and security of the states in the area, including the Palestinian state, and the guarantee of the UN Security Council for the implementation of above-mentioned principles. So, any questions on what they wanted?
I mean, no, but you...
Right. So...
advocating for a two-state solution, which the PLO was ready to consider. However, Israel's response was not peace, but war, In 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon, forcing the PLO to flee to Tunisia and killing around 20,000 Palestinians and Lebanese. This conflict severely weakened the PLO, diminishing its capacity for both armed resistance and political leadership. As the Palestinian Intifada erupted in the late 1980s, the PLO struggled to take control of the uprising that was led locally inside the occupied territories. During the Intifada, the PLO also lost one of its biggest financial backers, Kuwait, after the PLO sided with Iraqi President Saddam Hussein during the First Gulf War. Meanwhile, Israel faced a public relations crisis. Images of Palestinian youths throwing stones painted a David versus Goliath narrative that Israel couldn't combat. Recognizing the unsustainable economic and security cost of the occupation, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, infamously known as the Bone Breaker for his brutal crackdowns on non-violent protesters, finally agreed to a deal with the severely weakened PLO, leading to the creation of the Palestinian National Authority. This meant that the administrative and security role in the West Bank and Gaza, in what are known as Areas A and B, were taken off the hands of Israel, while the Israelis still maintained their full occupation of the majority of the territories in what is labeled as Area C. Better yet, the Palestinian Authority was funded by the US and EU, making Israel's occupation cost-free and enabling them to allocate their military resources elsewhere. Hamas, which had emerged during the Intifada, rejected the Oslo Accords along with other Palestinian factions. In 1995, following the massacre of Palestinians at the Ibrahimi Mosque in the West Bank by an Israeli extremist, Hamas carried out a series of suicide bombings.
Wow, Collin, Israeli extremists. You ever hear about them? You ever hear that shit happening? I bet you haven't.
That same year, Israeli PM Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by a right-wing Israeli, and by 1996, Benjamin Netanyahu had ascended to power, pushing the situation towards further violence and unrest, leading to the Second Intifada in 2000 that erupted after hopes for a two-state solution were crushed.
So, any thoughts so far?
No. I mean, I'm part of the course.
Yep.
For Israel.
Well, we continue. Hamas has often been blamed for the failure of peace talks and the Israeli government's refusal to compromise. However, the group was far from the first to use suicide bombings. Palestinian Islamic Jihad introduced the tactic in 1989, with several groups contributing to similar attacks throughout the 1990s. The peak of these attacks occurred during the Second Intifada in the early 2000s, while Hamas was responsible for 39.9%. Fatah, Islamic Jihad, and especially the Marxist-Leninist socialist organizations, the PFLP, accounted for the remainder. Hamas's violence came in direct response to Israel's own wantonly violent policies, including continued settlement expansion, apartheid, and, of course, an ongoing military occupation, all of which played significant roles in derailing the peace process. Even as armed Palestinian groups were crushed in the West Bank, especially during Israel's Operation Defensive Shield, which probably was offensive, they like their oxymorons over there, Hamas's resilience in Gaza compelled Israel to rethink its approach. By 2005, Israel withdrew from Gaza, but not before securing control over the West Bank, restructuring and repurposing the Palestinian Authority's security forces to ensure their coordination with Israeli occupation forces. Right? So that's I think the thing. The Palestinian Authority security forces had to work in coordination with the IOF, pretty much. Right? So successive Israeli governments, including those led by Netanyahu's Likud party, continued expanding settlements in direct contravention of international law, all while placing the blame on Hamas for stalled progress. The narrative of a so-called Hamas-Netanyahu radical alliance, promoted by some liberal Zionists, centers less on Hamas's actions and more on deflating responsibility from Israel's policies. So, I guarantee you Miss Daniela Weiss was a part of that, no? So
sure. Don't trust the liberals. They will betray you.
In the post 9/11 era, Islamic extremism became a convenient boogeyman for Israel in 2008. Netanyahu himself stated the September 11 attacks were beneficial for Israel because it had found a new equivalent to the Soviet Union in Iran and to the PLO and Hamas, arming itself with two new public relations tools. The first was to assert that the Palestinian Authority was not a rational negotiator for peace, and the second was to frame Israel's own Al-Qaeda type problem using the specter of Islamic terrorism as a distraction. So, even as, make sure I'm on, there we go. Borrowing from the battle-tested strategy of the post-9/11 Bush administration, today, Netanyahu claims that October 7th was Israel's September 11th. It's the same playbook used to advocate twice for U.S. military action in Iraq. However, Al-Qaeda was a transnational terrorist organization whose founders were armed and trained with CIA assistance to counter a Soviet-backed government in Afghanistan. The only real commonality between Al-Qaeda and Hamas is they share a common faith, Sunni Islam. However, each organization has distinct goals and origins. Al-Qaeda emerged as a transnational answer to the U.S. wars in the Middle East, whereas Hamas was founded with a focus on Palestinian national liberation. And they're trying to conflate the two even now. So, but I will let Inlakesh finish some of this up for us.
In the end, while Hamas may have played a role, along with every other Palestinian armed movement, in allowing Israel to justify its hardline stance, it was not the primary reason for the failure of the Oslo peace process. The roots of that failure lie in a combination of factors, including Israel's strategic decisions, continued occupation, US unconditional support for Israel, and the broader dynamics of Palestinian resistance. If Hamas was the real problem, why is Israel still building settlements, killing civilians, and tightening its control over the West Bank, a territory where the Palestinian Authority preaches nonviolence and cracks down on its own people who resist Israeli occupation through force? This is because the ideology really doesn't matter. It is the fact that Palestinians are using armed resistance against the expansion of a settler colonial project on their land, as Palestinians have been doing since the Arab Revolt of 1936 and even before that. In fact, every major Palestinian political party, whether they be secular nationalists, Marxists, or Islamists, are considered to be terrorist groups by Israel, with the current exception of the mainstream branch of Fatah, which rules the Palestinian Authority. Yet prior to the Oslo Accords, Fatah was the primary group they blamed for a lack of peace. Now, as this series is focused on whether Israel really helped to create and prop up Hamas, there are still other questions that need answers. So be sure to stay tuned for part 3 of this series, where we'll delve deeper into Netanyahu's agenda after the conclusion of the Second Intifada and the Qatari aid money's role in this conflict. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more in-depth analysis.
Yeah, do what he said. Closing thoughts, Care Bear?
Yeah, I did, but it's sorry, it escaped me for a second. But I don't know. Like, how can I say this so we don't get kicked off? I don't know. I think for me, it's the idea of, well, as you said, I think the first thing is how, well, I think at the core of it is essentially the idea of Arabs are the enemy. Like, Arabs are savages, they don't know any better, and like Islam is a radical religion and like all of this stuff, especially that came out of 9/11. I think has fed into a lot of kind of what we're seeing now. But it's interesting in just, I honestly, I never thought about it in terms of how Al-Qaeda and Hamas have been conflated, into more or less synonymous thing where they're not. And the idea that Hamas is strictly is a resistance group, like contrary to what we hear in mainstream media, but is a resistance group to support the liberation of Palestine. I think, which I kind of relate this, just to my own history, like in terms of resistance. Like, and I have to wonder, like, I do wonder about this. How is it, well, I say this with a grain of salt, but how is it that people can somewhat understand our need for resistance as Black people? And again, I'm saying that very loosely because I think while they might say they agree or understand it in theory, I'm sure, like, heart-wise, they don't. But I'll give people grace.
A lot of these people that are getting this wrong. Go ahead.
Like, how is it that people are able to accept, seemingly, my resistance, or at least my ancestors' resistance, but not necessarily of those in Palestine?
Yeah, well, I think anyone's resistance, like they compartmentalize that. These are the same people with the Gadsden flags on the wall. These are the same people who, still talk about give me liberty or give me death like it's, a rallying cry. Yet when people actually make that cry, fuck them, make them disappear. Like, and it just shows people don't care unless it actually applies to them, But, I hear people down here, well, it's like, I'd let them take 1 foot on my land, like, well, how about if 80% of your land has been taken from you? What then?
Right.
Like, plenty of AKs to go around, friend, So, like, I think there would be a lot more people willing to throw the resistance flags up in this regard if it was happening to them. But because it's some, brown people in the Middle East, they just tend to not care, unfortunately. So, yeah, I mean, and they don't really like the armed resistance your people had either, Collin, if I'm not mistaken.
No, I know, but that's what I'm saying is that people seemingly understand that.
Yeah.
But whether or not they truly do is another thing.
Yep. Well, as always, talking about these things are why we're demonetized. So you can go to ko-fi.com/indienewsnetwork or scan that QR code on your screen and, send us some money if you're so inclined. We appreciate it. Any little bit helps. But if you can't do that, don't forget to like and subscribe if you aren't already. Hit that share button, send this to your friends, your families, your pets, see if they are able to read. I don't know. Like, you might have the thing set up for the kiddies to watch, but make sure to leave a comment. Let us know what you thought. We do actually read them and help Ian and get to 3K. Otherwise, thanks for watching.
Who are these people?
I brought this again. We talked about this series by Robert Inlakesh before. He's just adding his part 3, but I feel like this is where I really start in my understanding, right? we'll get to a quote here that was where I was talking about this, because this all started just as a precursor to, people saying things like Netanyahu created Hamas, right? Israel created Hamas, right? So, which I said this. Turns out I don't know everything. Been wrong before. So there's some things which Inlakesh is going to get to, but this is the one I think people should probably have the biggest takeaways, because I think this is his like summarization of even his last two, right? Which were a lot of a history lesson. So we'll get into it. He writes, he might have heard that Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been propping up Hamas in Gaza. But is there more to the story? Some argue that Netanyahu has an alliance, or at least an interdependency with Hamas to serve his own goals. But is that really true? In the first two parts of the series, we explored whether Israel helped create Hamas and whether they've used Hamas to derail the Oslo peace process. Now, we're diving into a different question. Has Netanyahu been using Qatari aid money to support Hamas, aiming to block any actual resolution to the conflict, right? So this is where, some of the quotes you probably already heard, right? Specifically a 2019 one attributed to Netanyahu from a private Likud party meeting. So we're going to talk about this quote. If we play.
Quote, anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. This is part of our strategy to isolate the Palestinians in Gaza from the Palestinians in...
Now, I think I have brought this literal quote, correct? Like, on the show before. So, especially the beginning of this, right? So, I've definitely brought that as like, this is, supports my claims. So we'll see what Inlakesh pushes back on me with.
The West Bank. While Netanyahu has himself denied saying this, let's assume that he did. What he was referring to was the continued implementation of a decision made in August of 2018 when Israel's security cabinet approved the transfer of cash to Hamas from Qatar to be delivered in actual suitcases. Why, you may ask? Well, to understand this better, we have to go back a little further. In 2017, Saudi Arabia and a coalition of pro-US Arab states imposed a siege on Qatar, accusing it of backing extremism and demanding that Doha end its financial support for Hamas. This cutback strained Hamas financially, but ultimately backfired. It pushed Hamas even closer to Iran, their other key ally. That same year, Hamas released a new charter and accepted a two-state solution and rejected anti-Semitism. They even signed a deal with the Palestinian Authority to take over civilian control of Gaza, but Israeli and US pressure on the PA killed that deal just before it took effect. In a devastating blow to Gaza's already battered economy, the Palestinian Authority stopped paying salaries to its employees in Gaza in late 2017. On March 30, 2018, Hamas endorsed the Great Return March protests, where thousands of Gazans demonstrated peacefully along the separation fence. Israel's response was its forces killed hundreds of demonstrators and injured tens of thousands.
So, any questions so far?
Yeah.
Cool. We'll keep the trail roll. So, with Hamas shifting tactics, forming closer ties with Iran, and finding Israel unresponsive to nonviolent action, what does that sound like, Care Bear? We've heard those quotes before. Israel approved the Qatari aid to ease tensions, a move not intended to create an alliance, but to prevent an armed conflict from boiling over. Netanyahu defended the move, arguing that it was aimed at returning calm to the villages of the south. This Qatari aid continued even after Netanyahu was out of office under Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid. These names, man. And in 2021 and 2022. Benny Gantz, now a prominent Netanyahu opponent, was the defense minister while Qatari aid reached Gaza. So this is Qatar spent millions to Gaza for years with Israel's backing, right? So from CNN, that was in CNN, oddly enough. The other aspect of this argument of a Hamas-Netanyahu alliance is that Netanyahu had deliberately pitted the West Bank against Gaza. Yet, This split began in 2006 when Hamas won the Palestinian legislative elections during the reign of Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, who also decided to withdraw from Gaza and place it under siege in 2005. The idea that Netanyahu suddenly propped up Hamas also overlooks early Israeli policies aimed at deepening divisions between Palestinian factions. Back in 2007, a Palestinian civil war erupted between Hamas and Fatah. At the time, Israel Prime Minister Ehud Olmert and the Labour Party government supported a covert coup plot that was financed and armed by the Bush administration for Fatah to overthrow Hamas in Gaza. When Hamas uncovered this conspiracy and defeated the coup attempt, they took complete control of Gaza, ousting the Fatah-led Palestinian Authority. So, following this, Israel made repeated efforts to prevent any reunification between the PA and the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza. Israel tightened its blockade on Gaza, and in 2008-2009, Olmert's government launched the first major military assault on the territory, enforcing a policy of division between Gaza and the West Bank. Qatar, meanwhile, was continuing to back Hamas. Around this time, a leaked U.S. diplomatic cable from March 2008 revealed an Israeli strategy to keep Gaza on the brink of collapse. The goal, according to the cable, was to starve Gazan civilians so severely that they would turn against Hamas. And this was again when Netanyahu was out of power. So this was that starvation principle that they used. So,
right.
Any questions before I let Inlakesh finish this out? So
yeah, let him finish.
So, what does this all mean? Well, it's undeniable that Netanyahu has worked to prevent the creation of a Palestinian state, directly undermining efforts at Palestinian unity in 2014 and 2017, but it's an enormous stretch to say that he propped up Hamas. Ultimately, the idea of a Netanyahu-Hamas dependency rests on two assumptions. First, that Netanyahu alone is responsible for Palestinian oppression, ignoring Israel's broader role, and second, that...
What did that man just fucking say? What did he say, Care Bear? Please tell people what that man just told people. Okay? Like, louder for the people in the back, please and thank you. God. Like, I feel like I have to say the same things to everyone who should know better. He just said that, like, it's putting too much blame on Netanyahu, specifically, when Israel is the broader problem, right?
Right.
You know, not just some figurehead in the middle of it. You know,
right. Zionism is the problem in of itself.
Yes, yes, as well as capitalism, which is also intrinsically a problem.
It's intertwined with
internationally. Yes, yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yep. So.
Hamas operates on the basis of the West's Orientalist depiction of the group, that it is a collection of Muslim stereotypes, which explains its motivations as being driven by an ancient desire to kill the Jews, as US President Joe Biden claims. These assumptions allow for a pro-Israel argument that scapegoats Netanyahu for all Israeli crimes, while robbing Hamas of all historic context, and seeking instead to argue that its members are driven by a genetic disposition that compels terrorism against Jewish people, also assuming their intellectual inferiority in how easily they can be duped into an alliance with their own enemy. Hamas's founder, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, who was assassinated in an Israeli airstrike in 1988, once said, "The best solution is to let all Christians, Jews, and Muslims live in Palestine in an Islamic state." This statement actually contradicts many of the notions set forth in the movement's original charter, often quoted as if it represents the group today. Despite many disagreeing with Hamas and its tactics, it is seen today by the vast majority of Palestinians as a resistance movement against occupation. Among the plethora of Palestinian armed movements from secular and Marxist to Islamic, which all engage in similar tactics against Israel, it was Hamas that emerged from history as the most powerful in today's climate. While Israel has certainly weaponized Palestinian disunity to serve its interests, its measures were focused on weakening armed resistance rather than supporting any group outright. And claims that Israel created Hamas or that Netanyahu propped them up simply don't align with the facts.
Well, Closing thoughts?
Always a lot more new. It's always a lot more nuanced than just the base level statement or the base level video, which I kind of figured.
Yes.
Obviously, being online is hard to try and gather this information for yourself, especially with suppression. So shout out to Robert for actually doing the work to actually piece everything together. It makes a lot more sense. Somewhat. It's a little confusing to me even now, but
yeah, we probably need a few more repetitions in there.
Yeah, but but it's not as clean cut as Netanyahu gave money to Hamas. Because even that wouldn't necessarily make a lot of sense as to, and I know, you and Indy, we had this kind of talked about this, initially at the beginning of this assault last year. If Israel knew that Hamas was going to attack, why would they allow that type of thing? So
partially, I think that's mainly because they're willing to have any excuse to continue their land grabbing.
Right.
So,
but
yeah.
But yeah, like I said, it's a lot more nuanced than what people are saying online, even if they're right-ish, I'll say. But but the basic answer is usually the most effective, which may not always, most effective of getting the idea across, but may not necessarily be the best method. So,
and talking about all this nuance, especially when it regards Hamas, is why we're demonetized. So you can go to ko-fi.com/indienewsnetwork or scan that QR code on your screen if you want to tell YouTube we deserve some money anyway. But we get it, times tough. People are on fire. People's wallets are just incredibly dry this season. So, just like and subscribe, share, do all the engagement stuff that is supposedly helpful. Leave a comment, and if you're new here, subscribe. That really helps us out. So, otherwise, thanks for watching.
These people.
We pulled this Wednesday, Care Bear, and I managed to continue finding stuff even today about it. So I haven't seen anyone talk about this, other than a few people here or there. So you're probably wondering how aid can be weaponized. Well, we've seen parts of it before in many ways, but we're going to look at another angle. So this is from MintPress. Specifically Robert Inlakesh, right? And he writes, weaponized aid, Wall Street Zionists and ex-CIA operatives take over Gaza relief. So if you think it can't get worse, I'm here to tell you. So both these things were happening kind of at the same time. So this is Dimitri Lascaris, right? He writes, the genocidal entity has announced with great fanfare that it allowed 5 aid trucks into Gaza on Monday, and then it will allow dozens more aid trucks to enter Gaza in the coming days. As the UN has long stated, Gaza needs at least 500 aid trucks per day. Thus, the amount of aid Israel is allowing into Gaza is grotesquely inadequate. Its sole and obvious purpose is to deceive uninformed people into believing that Israel is fulfilling its humanitarian obligations. As such, this paltry level of aid is an insult to our intelligence. The government of Canada, France, and the United Kingdom have threatened to sanction Israel if it does not allow sufficient aid into Gaza. What are they waiting for? How many Palestinian children must starve to death before the scoundrels who led Western countries finally sanction Israel? And I think part of this is the second ICJ stuff about humanitarian aid specifically. I'm sure this is the response to that. So,
right.
Friend of the show, Eva Bartlett, by the way, 500 trucks a day is actually a very small amount. especially considering Israel has destroyed every means for Palestinians to simply exist. Keeping in mind that Palestinians not only desperately need food, but clean drinking water, medicines, and everything medical to deal with Israeli-created health crises. Consider that back in 2008, the genocidal Israeli sadists concocted a document calculating the bare minimum to keep Palestinians alive, then translated that into the number of aid trucks, then whittled that number down to around 130. That was 17 years ago, before numerous Israeli wars on the trapped population and the all-encompassing brutal siege further starved and impoverished Palestinians in Gaza before the 19th month of the genocide. So, if you think 500 trucks is a lot, considering all means of providing food for themselves, farming, fishing, working for a living, have been destroyed by the Israeli savages, think again, then realize they only allowed 5 in. So,
shout out to Eva for making that point, because I think most regular schmegular people, if they hear 500 trucks a day, would not make the connection that even that is too little. Because I think a lot of people are not necessarily thinking of aid ever in those kind of numbers. So think of it in this way. So the comparison I think you can make is like, think of like Manhattan, for example. It just Manhattan Island in of itself. If there was a catastrophe in Manhattan and they needed aid, do you think that 500 trucks a day is going to be enough for the people in that borough? You're going to say no. So if you think of it in those terms, then I think you can make the easy assumption. But I think that's the thing with numbers. It's so vague that people might think if it's a big enough number, then people might be like, oh, that seems okay.
Right.
So when the reality is, if you're taking 500 trucks for, I forgot how, now I think they say 2 million people it's probably way less than that now. But let's say 2 million, 500 trucks. That's not, and that would include, like basic essentials, not just food. Like, you can hopefully make the distinction that is not going to be nearly enough.
No.
It's the idea that, that they're saying, according to Dimitri, they're allowing 5 a day. Like, that should bring everybody alarm bells.
Right.
But, so that's a problem with talking about numbers in an abstract way, that people will just kind of glaze over it and not think too critically in terms of what does that mean. So, and that can be a talking point where people will say like, well, they're sending 500 trucks in. That seems to be enough. Well,
you got
500
no idea.
trucks for about 2 million people. Does that seem enough for you in terms of if you were trying to feed, clothe, and medicate Manhattanites? Does that seem enough to you? And if it doesn't, then it's like,
well, and here's the numbers, right? So Eva brought this, right? This is back in 2008, where they worked out that 2,200 calories per day, right? Which I guarantee you is practically calorie deficit in this case. 1,000 grams of food, almost 2 tons of food for the entire population of Gaza. Bring the quantity in the strip will require 170 truckloads per day, 5 times a week. So if they're allowing 5 in, we're not even getting fucking close to this. So that should tell you a lot, right? So, although therefore,
I just wish them.
Go ahead.
I just wish the media would speak about it in those terms, so people will have an idea of how horrifying this is.
Yeah.
But they're not going to, because reasons.
Right. And this is like, 131 truckloads of food a day, right? Like, I mean, they're not even getting close to that. So, so here is one of the aid trucks, just so you can see what's being like allowed in, right? But I mean, bags of flour, you know. Apparently, these bags also included death shrouds. Supposedly.
Those notice says the other boxes are not flour.
Right. So, yeah, I don't know what's in those, but, you know, hopefully something actually useful. But at least bakeries could reopen with that, you know. So, which I'm surprised there's any of those even left, you know.
Right.
At this point, like, but we're gonna get into why this might not be like. There's some fuck shit happening for sure, but nice to see bread being made again, you know. But Inlakesh writes, with over 500,000 people in Gaza on the brink of starvation and aid groups warning of an imminent famine, which I would imagine is already the case, Israel has agreed to allow a token number of relief trucks into the besieged enclave. But what's entering Gaza now isn't humanitarian aid, it's a Trojan horse. A new U.S.-backed private aid scheme staffed by former CIA operatives, ex-Marines, and mercenaries tied to Israeli intelligence and Wall Street elites has been deployed in Gaza under the guise of relief. The project is led by a shady NGO registered in Switzerland just months ago, and human rights groups are calling it what it is, a hostile corporate takeover of the aid sector, designed to militarize relief, displace civilians, and profit from Gaza's agony. At the heart of this scheme is the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, a nonprofit created in February and backed by Israeli authorities. Despite Gaza requiring a minimum of 500 aid trucks per day to meet basic survival needs, the Israeli military allowed just 1% of that to enter this week. GHF, which now controls the operation, was launched by individuals with no background in humanitarian work. David Papazian, formerly with the American National Interest Funds, Samuel Marcel Henderson, and David Kohler, CEO of Kohler Corporation. They are corporate executives, not aid workers. According to a leaked internal proposal circulated in May, GHF plans to establish 4 secure distribution sites in Gaza capable of feeding just a fraction of the population, 300,000 people, while giving the Israeli military and its contractors full operational oversight. The privatized model was fast-tracked with Israeli cabinet approval and immediately condemned by Amnesty International's Swiss branch, which called it an attempt to militarize the distribution of humanitarian aid and warned that the planned distribution sites resembled Israel's safe zone blueprint for ethnic cleansing. Jens Laerk, spokesperson for the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, said GHF threatened the UN with expulsion if it refused to cooperate. They're coming to take over, weaponizing aid, Laerk told reporters in Geneva. A U.S. government source speaking to France 24 called the project very much an Israeli idea, adding that it was less secure and deadlier than the Biden administration's failed floating aid pier, a costly boondoggle openly used to support an Israeli military operation that slaughtered nearly 300 Palestinian civilians, as the Navy would call a clusterfuck. That's what I would call it. You know, boondoggle. GHF's newly appointed executive director is Jake Wood, former jarhead sniper turned disaster entrepreneur. After tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, Wood founded Team Rubicon, an NGO that made its name in Haiti following the 2010 earthquake. I wonder if there's connections to the Clintons in Team Rubicon, Colin. I wonder. But Team Rubicon is no ordinary aid group. It is closely partnered with, guess who, Care Bear? Palantir Technologies, a CIA-backed data surveillance firm that equips the Israeli military with advanced targeting capabilities. Thanks, Peter Thiel. Its board includes former CIA Director David Petraeus and financial backers from Goldman Sachs. Former presidents George Bush and Bill Clinton have publicly endorsed the work. The GHF proposal reveals plans to work with both Truist Bank and JP Morgan Chase and suggests Goldman Sachs is facilitating the organization's financial infrastructure. As for security, GHF is outsourcing protection of its aid zones to U.S.-backed private military firms, some of which have direct ties to Israeli Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer. 2 firms are already confirmed. Thoughts, Care Bear?
I'm noticing a lot, and I know you don't like AOC of any at all, but I know that, and I'm actually looking for it. I noticed this week she tweeted. Actually, I want to actually read it because I want to make sure I get her language right. Because I don't want to
say some nonsense.
Yes, but I want to that's the thing of having 2.
Right.
I remember. I guess it's her Congress one. Doing this in real time, folks. Oh wait, did I forget it?
You got it? Cool.
Yeah. So on her Congress Twitter, so she put out a memo on 3 days ago, which she titles Ocasio-Cortez Statement on the Worsening Humanitarian Crisis in Gaza. So remember how there was a lot of issues with her not saying genocide, and actually she got called out for not saying genocide. Well, I guess now she's going back to calling it a humanitarian crisis. So, but let me read what she says here. Israelis' blockade of food and humanitarian assistance to Gaza is in violation of international law. Another 14,000 babies face severe malnutrition if the Israeli government does not reverse its course. The United States can prevent this atrocity. We must pressure the Israeli government to open up more routes for humanitarian aid and to finally uphold the law by stopping further weapons transfers to Israel. So I think now she liberalized it. Not just her, but she liberalized genocide by calling it humanitarian aid, because that just sounds like now, save the children type stuff. Sending some $5 a month to help one child type stuff.
There's always the macro, and then there's the micro.
So the idea that, they're trying to remove the word genocide because that has more severe consequences, and make it humanitarian aid because that gives the cover of, we're actually trying to try and help them, but we don't have to tell you in what way and how much or whatever else. So they're putting the bureaucracy around.
You look under the page, you look under the first cover of everything, and it's, Goldman Sachs and Palantir and, the fucking Rubicon group.
So they're bureaucratizing this essentially, which is disgusting. But then it's just the idea you're trying to nullify genocide. You're trying to remove genocide from everyone's vocabulary so that people do not take it. Hopefully people just do not take it as seriously as they would. Not to say humanitarian aid isn't as much serious, but it kind of lessens the thing, so to speak, of not calling it a genocide. So here's the even more disgusting bit.
So this I found today, right? This is Rabbi David Mevazer. Moments ago, all charities in Gaza were told that if we did not allow armed American mercenaries to take over all aid and to photograph, fingerprint, and take retinal scans of every single person receiving aid from us, that we can no longer receive or distribute any more aid. So this is they're putting the screw to this. Like, you know, all that donating online to whatever you want ain't happening. So this is now going through CIA and all sorts of stuff. So here's another one. One, Safe Reach Solutions, ran by Philip F. Riley, former CIA paramilitary chief, who also worked for Constellus, the rebranded face of Blackwater. While Eric Prince, Blackwater's notorious founder, has not been directly linked to GHF, his newer mercenary form, Reflex Responses, was previously proposed to secure Gaza's Rafah crossing. The second firm, UG Solutions, hired approximately 100 former Special Forces soldiers earlier this year to perform vehicle inspections in Gaza. They were reportedly paid $1,000 per day with a $10,000 upfront bonus. UG Solutions is headed by James Khan Govani, a former Special Ops operative and co-founder of the Sentinel Foundation. These contractors were also reportedly involved in staffing the Netzarim corridor, a road that bisects Gaza during a recent ceasefire. Their presence on the ground and the opacity around their funding marks a new phase in the U.S. and Israeli campaign to dominate Gaza not just by bombs, but through control of the most basic elements of life: food, water, and movement. Even Israel's closest regional ally, the UAE, has refused to participate in the project, likely due to the plan's political toxicity. This scheme doesn't exist in a vacuum. For years, the U.S. and Israel have worked to undermine UNRWA, the UN's primary aid agency in Palestine. The Biden administration froze its funding, while Israel moved to outlaw the agency entirely. In the vacuum, GHF and its army of private contractors have emerged, not to serve Palestinians, but to manage their displacement more efficiently. While American taxpayer dollars flowing into the hands of former intelligence agents, global financiers, and mercenaries, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation represents the convergence of Silicon Valley surveillance, Wall Street speculation, and Zionist military objectives. So here's MintPress. Israeli murders the head of the Palestinian Relief Office in Gaza amidst their conspiracy to privatize aid. The Israeli military assassinated Ahmad Mansour as part of an ongoing campaign to exterminate heads of society organizations and relief efforts in Gaza. And I think I saw recently another woman that was involved with, relief and aid also got murdered. So this is the kind of stuff we're dealing with. They're trying to take over this entire wing of aid. So, which I found this funny at least. So Eva Bartlett, I won't engage directly with Zionist trolls. However, one such moron asks, why is it Israel's responsibility to feed Palestinians? I'd say, are you fucking joking me? But we know they aren't joking. They're that mentally depraved. Israel controls Gaza's entry and exit points, as well as the sea, doesn't allow Palestinians to export, severely as in almost nothing prior to the genocide, prevents imports, guns down Palestinian farmers and fishers, steals fishing boats and equipment, destroys wells and cisterns in the agricultural areas, making it near impossible for farmers to irrigate their land if they can access it without an Israeli sniper shooting them dead or maiming them. If farmers overcome all of these obstacles, the Israeli sadists burn their crops, bulldoze their farmland, and to unusable swaths of churned up earth. How the hell are people supposed to survive then? By the way, in my experience, Palestinians don't want to be reliant on aid, but when every fucking option for survival is deliberately obliterated, then what choice do they have? Closing thoughts, Care Bear?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense that no one's going to talk about this because, like I said, it's still it's still the idea that most people believe that we're hearing or like 500 trucks coming in a day. So I think most people are again, glaring over the numbers, and someone in the chat said this. Let me just see if I can go back. Yeah, Chris H in our chat said the numbers regarding like the number of trucks coming in, lack of palatable context. Like people don't know what that means.
No.
Like generally people don't, especially for like aid, people don't have that kind of context to understand what is sufficient. So you can just throw out a number, like a big enough number, and for most people, they're going to be like, yeah, that sounds good, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not going to get talked about a lot because, people don't have that kind of connection to what that means. But, as you said, some of that aid is not aid. I would argue most of it is not aid. It's just
and then
dummies.
When you tie this to what Mir Fazair said, that like it's not just their, like any charities now have to go through retinal scans, fingerprints, all that stuff. That's all just to help them make genocide easier. Right. Yeah. Like exactly. So that makes helping the people like this is why they're doing what they're doing. It's all to push them further and further out of the real estate.
Yeah, I mean, I think I said this a couple of streams ago. Like, I went to Colombia last month, and like coming back in, they just scanned my eye in order to enter the country. That's it. I don't even think they looked at my passport. They just said, look into here. Not sure what they popped up, but I'm sure all my like data popped up. So they were, and then they were like, okay, you can go. So, they can get anything that they want from you now. From a body part. So, but it kind of brings to surveillance as to determine where they're at and kind of locate them at any point, and especially those who might try to resist, they can just straight up unalive them at a moment's notice.
Yeah, AI targeting system will pick it up immediately. So, but yep, figured we should talk about this since no one else is going to look under the covers, So, but talking about it is almost certainly why YouTube figures we shouldn't get money from you people and decided to demonetize us. So you can say screw you, YouTube, and go to ko-fi.com/indienewsnetwork or scan that QR code on your screen because Indie News is brought to you by viewers such as yourselves. But you can like and subscribe, share the video, leave a comment, do all the algorithm stuff. If you can't give monetarily, we appreciate any help we can get to reach new people. We're trying to get to 3K. We're getting there. We're almost there. Just a little 500 people need to show up. But, otherwise, thanks for watching.
These people,
they're killing us softly, Collin. Microsoftly, just to be specific. Everyone's favorite fucking like operating system, Windows Vista, Windows XP. So one of those. But oh no, Windows error. Anyway, another Inlakesh article. He writes, Microsoft role in Gaza goes way beyond the ICC email lockout. And look at this guy, Care Bear. You see this guy? You see what he's wearing? Look at that. Right? So this is from the AP. An Israeli officer wears Microsoft HoloLens headset during military testing. Care Bear, do you know what the HoloLens is?
Well, it looks like the Microsoft's equivalent of was it like the Apple glasses or whatever those are called?
Sure. Sure.
So,
here's their demo, which I've removed their music.
like a
I'm
virtual
gonna do
reality
this.
thing.
I'm gonna do this. Yeah, and then we're gonna do this, just for precaution's sake, even though all of this falls under fair use. Yeah.
This is work.
So, Mike,
We're giving eyes and ears to AI. So the world becomes your prompt and your interface. This is work. Working. These are thoughts happening.
Hey, pilot.
Plans populating.
Co-pilot, when was this last replaced?
Information gathering. Instructions guiding. Schematics aligning. People connecting. Problem solving.
co-pilot?
Hey, co-pilot. Co-pilot.
This is confidence growing. Eyes widening. These are questions.
I just finished co-pilot. What's next?
Rotate the engine block 90 degrees.
Questions the way you ask them.
Please get me the detailed view of the optical cable layout.
Never too many questions.
All right. Let's highlight the relay switches.
Go ahead. Keep asking.
It's in position. What's next?
Keep learning.
The hydraulic filter was changed 6 months ago.
Okay, can you pull up the service record?
Co-pilot, what's the tolerance of this locking ring?
Here is a copy of the last service record. The tolerance is 9,000ths of an inch.
Remind me where this fits into the assembly.
Step 4, align the spindle. The locking ring is highlighted.
This is work getting smarter. This is work working better. This is work working.
Working, Care Bear.
This is work making sense of the world around you.
Is it?
Co-pilot, let Ruth know that I'm finished and close out the work order.
This is AI for the front line.
For the front line, Care Bear. AI for the front line. Yay! Nothing like some AR glasses for soldiers. You know, show me the nearest Palestinian to shoot, co-pilot. I'm sure will be uttered. So, did you see this right here, Care Bear? So, British ICC chief prosecutor lost access to email and his bank accounts frozen after Trump sanctions on top court. So, I don't know if you saw this, but Inlakesh is gonna mention it. So, last week, headlines lit up with a staggering development. Microsoft locked the world's top war crimes prosecutor out of his email. Karim Khan, chief of the ICC, had dared to go after Israeli officials for war crimes and was instantly digitally silenced. His accounts were frozen, his name smeared, his power stripped. It looked like petty revenge, but it wasn't just that. It was the latest move in a coordinated campaign backed by Washington, Tel Aviv, and Silicon Valley to destroy the one court willing to challenge Israeli impunity. Microsoft is at the center of it. While the press... yes.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Feel free. I was going to let you finish, dog. You know?
Well, I mean, all I was going to say, Glenn Greenwald, anyone? I mean, we didn't report on that because everyone else in the mother did, but like,
yeah,
you know,
among many,
obviously, among many. So,
yeah,
you know, yes, I understand the significance of Glenn Greenwald, but this guy should have also gotten as much attention as
more,
which he didn't, so,
like
or more. So.
While the press obsessed over the email lockout, few paid attention to what came before. It's U.S.-Israeli information war against the ICC. After the court announced arrest warrants against both Hamas and Israeli officials for war crimes in Gaza, U.S. officials went into overdrive. Biden called the decision outrageous. Lawmakers threatened sanctions. Netanyahu smeared the court as anti-Semitic. Despite the outrage...
Wait, what?
Yes.
When did this happen? When did this happen?
Last week. This email thing. You know, this is over the ICC stuff. So that's been happening since Biden.
But and again, this is speculative.
Yeah.
So let me preface by saying that. But I just wonder, assuming this happened around the same time as the Glenn Greenwald fiasco, I just have to wonder if this was kind of
the
in
reason,
a sense, maybe it could have been a coincidence, but it seems kind of intentional. like in a way of
covering up
give
and
Glenn
distracting.
Greenwald the attention to distract from this, which if the mainstream media actually did their job, really should be the bigger story.
Sure.
Now, granted, with Glenn Greenwald, I only saw that mostly online pretty much, but this should have been mainstream news. But of course, mainstream media is in the pocket of Israel, so they're not going to report on this anyway.
No, they're not. How dare you?
But I can't help but feel like Glenn Greenwald was a pleasant distraction, so people wouldn't talk about this at all.
So, despite the outrage, the warrants reflected a 3-2 ratio. Yahya Sinwar, Ismail Haniyeh, and Mohammed Al-Deif of Hamas, Israel Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and Prime Minister Netanyahu. Despite all three Palestinian leaders have since been killed. The Israeli officials remain untouched. Then came the kicker. The U.S. government sanctioned Khan himself. His bank accounts were frozen, and his allies were warned, help him and face criminal charges. It wasn't the first time either. In 2002, Congress passed the American Service Members Protection Act, better known as the Hague Invasion Act. It authorizes the president to send troops into the Netherlands if any American or allied official is detained by the court. But while the U.S. handled the threats and the muscle, Microsoft played a more subtle role. According to Khan, the company blocked him from his official ICC email account just as he was formalizing charges against top Israeli leaders. The timing, to many, wasn't a coincidence, it was a message. Following October 7th, Microsoft signed $10 million in new contracts with the Israeli military through a secretive program called Project Azure. The company provided infrastructure for Israeli intelligence and Air Force units, including Unit 8200 and Unit 81. These are the same units compiling kill lists in Gaza. The company stayed quiet until recently when it admitted to providing emergency support to Israel, but insisted that there was no evidence it tech harmed civilians. We investigated ourselves and found we did nothing. Here's Middle East Eye saying inside the campaign to end Microsoft's collaboration with the Israeli army. Do you remember this lady, Care Bear? Do you remember this lady right here? So you're going to. You're going to remember. Hold on. Once I play the beautiful bean footage.
Other than, wait, you played it for me yesterday, or you played it last night when we were
Well, last week, Microsoft celebrated their 50th anniversary. But what was meant to be a flashy and jovial moment for the tech giant instead became a spotlight on its complicity in Israel's war on Gaza. That's because two courageous junior engineers stood up and disrupted the high-profile events, one involving the company's founder, Bill Gates. You may have seen the viral footage of Ibtihal Abu Said disrupting a speech by Microsoft's AI CEO, Mustafa Suleyman. The young Moroccan engineer was part of the company's leading AI audio transcription team, but discovered her work was being used to help the Israeli military record and translate Palestinian voices on the ground in Gaza before they're being targeted by Israeli airstrikes. When she found out, she felt she had no choice but to speak up. Have a listen.
The question I wanted to address today is really simple. What does all this mean?
Mustafa, shame on you. You say you claim that you care about using AI for good, but Microsoft sells AI weapons to the Israeli military. 50,000 people have died, and Microsoft powers this genocide in our region.
Thank you for your protest. I hear you.
You're serious, tell me, you know about this, Mustafa.
I hear your protest. Thank you.
Shame on you. You are a war profiteer. Stop using AI for genocide, Mustafa. Stop using AI for genocide in our region. You have blood on your hands. All of Microsoft has blood on its hands. How do you all celebrate when Microsoft is killing children? Shame on you all.
Thank you. I hear your protest. Thank you.
I hear you. I hear you. Fucking god damn it. That guy, dude.
I acknowledge your dissent, but I'm not going to do shit about it.
Right. Yeah, like... I mean, it's pretty much like... anyway, how many times are we going to hear I hear you now? You know?
Right.
So, anyway, we're actually going to hear her, right? We're going to talk to her directly. Well, Middle East Eye is. luckily, we had the power of technology.
You'll notice
so
in that video that Abu Said, a Moroccan, refers to Mustafa Sulaiman by his ethnicity as Syrian in connection to what is happening in Gaza. Now, Abu Said was fired on Monday by Microsoft over what the company called, quote, just cause willful misconduct, disobedience, or willful neglect of duty. We spoke to her yesterday and she told Middle East Eye that many of the staff working at Microsoft are kept in the dark about how their work is being used to help Israel's military.
It has this reputation of being a company that empowers people and empowers organizations. So unlike a military arms manufacturer, for example, where you know what you're signing up for and you've made that decision based on your values, for Microsoft, we just felt as employees that we were tricked, right? We did not sign up to work on code that directly powers war crimes. So speaking to my personal example, I worked in the AI org and I worked on speech to text essentially. And what I was describing about these tools being used for surveillance and targeting is definitely not something I signed up for. When I was trying to join the organization, all the marketing was around we have these accessibility products where people who have hearing issues can see transcriptions. It's all marketed as a force for good and tech that benefits the world. And so that's what makes it even more important to speak up, because this was not something that any of the employees really just join Microsoft for.
Thoughts?
I mean, she's no lies detected.
yeah. No lies detected. So, here's from the Independent, right? Microsoft admits it provided AI to Israeli military for war in Gaza. So, they admit it. That's what they're doing. Lady's got a point, so, but that's not all. Microsoft previously poured $78 million into the Israeli surveillance firm AnyVision, whose facial recognition tech was deployed across the West Bank. It also powered an app developed by the Israeli military, Al-Munesik, which spies on Palestinian permit holders. Its cloud systems process their private phone data. Worse still, Microsoft has been stacking its upper ranks with veterans of Israel's Unit 8200, effectively embedding a foreign intelligence agency into the core of one of America's most powerful corporations and building its next data centers in Israel. While the ICC is being sabotaged from the top, resistance is brewing from within. On April 4th, 2 Microsoft employees, one a whistleblower, disrupted the company's 50th anniversary celebration, accusing it of complicity in genocide. Both were fired. Then, at the Build 2025 conference, Palestinian engineer Joe Lopez interrupted CEO Satya Nadella mid-speech, saying, "My people are suffering." Security dragged him out. A day later, another protest shouted down a separate keynote, "No Azure for Apartheid." Protesters outside waved Palestinian flags and demanded answers. I bet they didn't get shit. These demonstrations were organized by the group No Azure for Apartheid, which has been documenting how Microsoft's tools are helping Israel wage war. Inside the company, those who speak out face retaliation. Meanwhile, Netanyahu is gloating the prosecutor should be worried about his status. He said after the warrants were announced, that threat has aged well. Many critics of Microsoft's outsized role in Israel's war argue that when a foreign state and its allies in Silicon Valley can paralyze an international court with the click of a button, it's not just Gaza under siege, it's in our institutions, our tech, and our sovereignty. So that's it. That's what I have to say. Microsoft sucks. Shut it down. Just shut it all down. Fucking close the door, turn it off. You know what I mean? Shut it down.
I was wondering if you were going to insert that sound clip.
Yeah,
you did.
Working on it. I got there. Any closing thoughts? No.
I mean, Well, I think you wanted to report on this because this is kind of in your wheelhouse in terms of like AI and like the doom and gloom of
murder
it,
robots.
and then like
Yeah,
how
don't worry about
essentially
it.
it's going to
It's fine.
exactly. Like
It's fine.
yeah. So, but you know what this kind of reminds me of? This kind of shows me my not nerdom, but like kind of some of my geeky moments. So you know, you haven't seen Evangelion in full, correct?
No, I've not.
No.
Only bits and pieces.
So those of you who know, so those of you who do watch anime and argue good anime, in Neon Genesis Evangelion, the whole like Tokyo Free, basically the military city that they built to defend themselves from the angels was basically run by supercomputers known as the Magi. So essentially those computers basically run the show. So this kind of is what this is reminding me of, like in terms of having computers essentially making the decisions, especially big decisions for the human race. So it's kind of scary to think about like that anime that came out in 1995. We're basically nearing that point now in terms of AI being able to make decisions for us like 30 years later. Essentially, we're there now. So it's kind of scary to think about, one, how fast technology has become, that we're able to get to this point coming from a sci-fi anime, but then like how scary it is that, you know, given, you know, all these connections with AI and drones and the military, you know, like, you know, like they can find you and off you, you know, just with a simple command.
Have you seen the it's on Apple TV, the Murderbot show?
No.
Yeah, it stars Alexander Skarsgård. You know, a rogue security robot secretly gains free will. So, I mean, they're definitely trying to like let you know before the terror gets here, you know, hey, this might be some things to worry about. So, yeah, not great. Not great. Not good. Not great. So, but yeah, talking about these things is most likely why tech companies such as YouTube demonetize us for talking about such things, you know. But if you want to give money to us anyway and say fuck YouTube and Microsoft, you could do it at ko-fi.com/indienewsnetwork or by scanning the QR code on your screen. And if YouTube lets us, keep it down in the doobly-doo below. But if you can't give monetarily, just do all the algorithm stuff. It's apparently the only thing that gets us to new people. So like and subscribe, share the video to your friends. We literally get support one viewer at a time. And, you know, leave a comment. Let us know what, you know, are you using Microsoft machines? Are you worried about this? You should be. But let us know. Otherwise, thanks for watching.